My grandpa always told us that Navajo should never own things that belong to people who have passed away, unless it was gifted with a good purpose, before they passed on, that is. Have any of you ever heard this? He also told me that we shouldn't have any images of owls, or any feathers belonging to them, basically anything associated with an owl, or for example dolls that have faces on them. He also told us other things that we shouldn't own, but I can't seem to remember too many of them. Does anyone else happen to know what else we shouldn't have, aside from what I'm going to share with you? I live in North Arizona, and there were some weird things happening over at my mom's house. Back in the early 80s, my mom bought a house next door to the house that she owned. I remember there was an older couple living in the house with their 3 small granddaughters. The girls had moved in with them because something had happened to their mom. One day, during the winter, the grandmother had to travel to Phoenix with some other ladies because they were in a women's club, and they were having some sort of big meeting. On the way back home, near Flagstaff, they got into a serious car accident because of the snow and icy conditions, and the grandmother passed away. The grandfather took care of the girls who were all still in school. My mom and dad worked at the school, and the girls would walk with my mom to and from school as well. We lived so close by, so my mom would watch the girls after school until their grandfather got home from work. This is how we knew just about everything that was going on. Then, a few years later after their grandmother passed away, the grandfather passed away as well. I don't know where the girls moved after that, but I know one of the aunts took them. I think she lived out of state or something, because they moved out and were never seen again. So my mom ended up buying the house at a super low price, and her and my dad started to remodel the whole inside. They tore down a bedroom to make a dining room in the kitchen, and they also changed a bunch of other things. As they were working on the house, my brother, who was older than I was, decided to stay there with his family. They were looking for a place at that time, and they couldn't find something, so my parents decided to let them stay there for a few. While they were staying there, sometimes we would have dinner or hang out all together. And one time my brother and his wife said they used to see a small black shadow dashing from one room to another very late at night, and some other weird things. I'm also going to say this. Whenever I would walk in there, I always felt like someone was watching me. I always thought it was due to the history of the house where people had passed away. Well, they didn't pass away in the house itself, just the fact that 2 people who used to be here were no longer living there. Anyways, I wasn't the only one. Everyone would say the same thing, that it just felt off. Aside from this, I want to share some creepy experiences we all went through there. One weekend, we had family come over, and so my parents said that we would sleep in the other house with my brother and his family. That way the visitors, which was family, can have the better place. As much as I didn't want to stay there, I didn't have a choice. So we had a bunch of cousins, aunts, and uncles come over. I ended up sleeping in that creepy house with 3 younger cousins all in one room. This room was in the back of the house, and it happened to be an addition that they built. As we were sound asleep, I heard one of my cousins calling my name. I looked over at him where he was sleeping, and he told me he saw an outline of a face above him. He said it was an old woman. He got scared and told me to turn on the light. As I was getting up from the inflatable mattress on the bedroom floor, that's when I heard a light tapping coming from the attic. By this time, my other cousins have also woken up, and one of them is asking me if we have rats or something, because they've been hearing all sorts of noises all night up there, and they haven't been able to sleep. I told them it must be all the remodel going on, drawing in some animals or something. At this point, I don't know. Anyways, the noise stops after a minute or so, and we all end up sleeping with the lights on. Nothing else happens after that. One day, we were sitting in the living room as a family, and my dad wasn't home. My mom then out of nowhere tells us to be quiet and to turn the TV off. I assumed that she heard my dad's car and wanted to make sure it was him pulling up. We turned the TV off and we were just sitting there in silence. My mom then got up and walked over to the window, and just like that, she stepped away. As she walked away from the window, she started to point towards it, whispered to us that someone was out there, and for all of us to go to the bedroom. We all went to the bedroom and locked ourselves in there until my dad got home. When my dad finally came, he found us all in the closet. Looking back now, it was a bit funny because we didn't know what exactly was going on. That's until my mom explained to my dad that she heard some footsteps outside, like someone was running while we were all in the living room, and that when she went to go look out the window, she saw a figure, a small shadow, looking from the outside in. She then said that the figure took off running. The last major thing that happened that changed everything was when my brother, who lived with his family at the other house, and by the way, my grandfather had came over that weekend, but he was staying with them. Well, my brother said he heard faint singing coming from the backyard, and this was at night. His grandfather wanted to go look. You know how our grandparents are. They're not afraid of anything, and they're ready to confront whatever or whoever is out there. My brother didn't want to go, but my grandfather basically forced him and told him he has to not be afraid and to set his foot down, that this is his place. My brother then said that they went outside, and when they did, he said they saw some Hopi Kachinas singing and dancing in the backyard. He said it freaked them out because the Hopi REZ is about an hour and a half drive north of Winslow. They both went inside, and my grandpa said that they started smudging. Nothing else happened after that. My grandfather ended up bringing a medicine man a few days later. And basically, he said it's not the people who lived here before or the remodel, it's the things they left behind. Coming to find out, during the remodel, my parents didn't get rid of everything. Up in the attic was a box that had Kachina dolls that belonged to the previous people, either the grandparents or to the granddaughters. When they found the Kachina dolls, the medicine man refused to touch them. He said they don't belong here. They never did. They need to be returned or cleansed, not thrown away. I'm not sure what happened after that, but my grandpa and the medicine man were the ones who handled the removal. I remember my grandpa said that Kachinas should never be owned by Navajos, since they serve a specific purpose for the Hopi. Bringing them into a Navajo household can invite bad energy or disturb some things. I'm starting to think that they had something to do with the grandparents who passed away, or the overall bad luck that family had. I don't live there anymore, but my family told me that they haven't encountered anything else no more. There are some things that aren't meant to be ours, and we're not supposed to have them in the first place. That's what my grandpa always told me. Did your family ever tell you any of these things, or about things that you should never own? Out here on the REZ, you should always clean and organize your home. When you have people, friends, and even family visit you, have you cleaned your house lately in detail? You should, for other reasons. My grandma taught me a lot of things, all the rules that we're familiar with. She said that sometimes things find their way into your home, things that don't belong there, an item or something. Sometimes you don't notice right away, but that's exactly the danger of this. Did your grandparents ever share some crazy stories that make you doubt them? I'm referring to stories about sheep who talk, someone who saw a person with deer hooves, or little people, water babies. Don't get me wrong now, those stories are scary as well, and I believe them, especially because there are reports and people who have experienced these things throughout time. But there is this one story that my grandma shared with me, that after she came to visit me one time and saw that my house wasn't clean, as silly as it might sound, it will make sense at the end. So my grandma would tell me so many stories growing up that would completely scare me. Stories about stuff that she saw with her dad. He happened to be a medicine man, a healer, and she joined them on a bunch of trips to go break curses and help families out. Towards the later years of her life, she said she had quote-unquote retire, and she started going to a church as well. She said one evening she was at church, and it was raining a lot, so she called a cab because she always walked to the church. At church, there was a man that also lived on the same road with my grandma, and he asked if she could share her cab with him, and of course my grandma said yes. At this point, my grandma tells me that she never saw this man out, except at church, and even then he would always sit by himself. He would sometimes start giggling, talking to himself, just acting sort of strange, saying random things to himself, while at the same time just jittery. So on the way home, they were all making small talk, which actually surprised my grandma that the man was actually talking. And then he made a weird statement to the cab driver. He said that he visits my grandma every night at the same time. Grandma didn't think too much of what he said, and she just ignored it. So a few weeks later, she was sitting down in the living room, reading a magazine, and she said she kept seeing movement above her. She finally saw what was catching her eye. It was a bubble in the wallpaper she had just put up. She said she walked up to it and hit it with the magazine, and then she said she carefully tore the paper back, and a little bat fell out. She had broken its wing and one of its legs, so she said she picked it up and took it out onto her porch, and she told her cats they could have it if they wanted it, and she went back in. So a few days later, some family comes up to visit Grandma. They lived down the road from Grandma, close to where that strange man lived, and asked if she heard about some people finding that man dead in his own house. They said when they found him, he was naked on the floor with a broken arm and leg. The people who picked him up couldn't figure out how he died, and come to find out, they determined that he died a few days earlier. After hearing all of that, I remember just sitting there processing what she told me. My grandma just nodded like it was nothing new to her. I'm sure she had seen so many other things that she simply never was going to tell me. She always told me to be careful who you hang out with. Not everyone who smiles at you has good intentions. And some people come around for a reason that you might not understand until it's too late. I remember she said maybe he was trying to start to befriend me so he could curse me or something. I'm not sure. But that's why you never just let anyone get close to you. You never know what they're really about. Be nice to people, but to an extent. The more I thought about it, the more I started to wonder if he was out to get her or something. I know my grandma had spent her life helping her dad, traveling alongside him as they would heal families, and they fought against the kind of things that most people don't want to talk about. Maybe this man wasn't just some random churchgoer. Maybe he knew who she was. Maybe he knew what she had done. She also said that some people carry things with them. Jealousy, bad medicine, and if you're not careful, they might pass it on to you. But there was one other thing she always said, which is what I'm trying to tell you this whole time. She said, always clean your house. Look around. If something feels off, check it. Look in the corners, behind doors, on top of doors, by the window frames, under any mats or rugs, even under things you don't normally move. The mat at the front door, above the door. You never know what's been left behind for you. She said bad things always have to be invited, and once they're in, they like to hide. That's why you check your walls, your doors, even little things like a misplaced object or something that wasn't there before. Watch out for sudden foul smells. Watch for a rug or blanket that won't stay put, even after you fix it. Check for an unfamiliar bead, rock, or even a single strand of hair placed around something in your home. I still think about that story sometimes. I don't exactly know what that man was, but I know one thing. I always clean my house more often now, especially when people come over after they have left. So just clean your house, look in the corners, check the walls, because you never know what's been left behind for you. If you grew up on the REZ and survived, you basically can handle anything thrown at you. You get taught real quick about respecting the land, the rules, and watching your back. If you can survive running out of gas 20 miles away from the nearest house at night, surviving a family get-together when everyone is asking why you're still single, and if you survive the REZ aunties who will burn sage and smack you at the same time saying why you're so dumb. In all seriousness, I love my culture and people, and while living here, you do hear stories about what goes on, especially about the backroads to other communities or spots where people like to go. Case in point is a story that my uncle told me a long time ago. This isn't one of those Americanized stories where someone's speeding down a highway and suddenly something with razor-sharp teeth. By the way, why is it always razor-sharp teeth? Something very common in these fake stories. But anyways, It's not one of those where something is running alongside them at 60 or 70 miles per hour before just disappearing. Most of the time those are fake. Not all of them, as I have listened to some stories from the elders, but just like the rest of our stories and culture, a lot of that has been stolen and twisted to fit a certain agenda. But that's a story for another day. For now, let me tell you what happened. I live on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. There is this back road that goes from where I live to a junction, and once you get there, you can turn to your right to get on Mouse Creek Road, and you'll end up at Wounded Knee. You turn left, you can go to Batesland or make a right turn and make your way to Highway 18, and from there, you can go to Gordon, Nebraska. From Porcupine to the junction, it's about 7 miles, maybe more. I never really kept track. The road is a bit freaky even in the daylight. Like most reservation back roads, it's a mixture of gravel and dirt depending on what part of the res you're in. It twists and turns as you leave the paved road and get on the back road. It goes through some dry creek beds where the shoulders are just a few feet away from plum bushes, other bushes and trees, and other spots in the open prairie. Eventually, you get this really beautiful little valley where the road dips down. It goes straight by some trees. I think they're cottonwood or elm trees. The trees are on both sides of the road and the branches overhanging the road. You then drive over a small creek, and the road continues to be surrounded by trees on either side. It's not there anymore, but there used to be a small windmill off to the east, and a stock dam that was close by. My uncle said that he was coming back from Gordon, late in the evening during the summer. He had gone to Gordon and was coming home. My uncle was driving his pickup along the road. He made it from the paved road to the gravel road. He made a left turn as he left the road that takes you to Gordon. He then drove about a quarter of a mile and turned right on the road that would take him back home to Porcupine. The moon was not out that night, so he was enjoying the stars, looking out the window and looking up through the windshield. He got to the south side of that little valley that I was describing, and he drove down into it. As he got to the part where the creek and the trees are beside the road, he started driving and was underneath all the trees. That's when there was a really loud crashing noise, and something hit the top of the pickup cab. The back of the pickup bed dropped down like something heavy had fallen into the truck bed. My uncle stepped on the brakes and came to a full stop to light up the area behind the truck. He thought a tree branch had fallen into the back, and it happened to roll off. Through the side mirror, he looked, and in the red brake lights he didn't see anything. He was about to start moving again when the same noise and heaviness happened again. Except this time, he looked through the rear view mirror, and there was someone standing in the pickup bed. All he could see was a dark silhouette. He then rolled his window down. He told him that if he needed a ride, he could have stood just on the side of the road, instead of being stupid and jumping into the back of the pickup bed from a tree, or whatever happened. The person on the back of his truck just banged the top of the pickup cab like he was ready to go. Maybe you know, maybe not, but on the REZ, especially back in the day, it was common for people to hitchhike. Long roads connected the communities, and if you had to get from one to the other, those roads were the only way. People knew this and would give rides whenever they could, but only at day. You never pick up hitchhikers at night, and as you know, always look at their feet. So it was common to simply pick up someone walking, and they would hit the cab again once they were ready to get off. So after this, my uncle, he rolled up his window and started moving again. My uncle got about 50 yards down the road when the person in the back started banging on the top of the cab. He rolled down his window, and he started yelling out to him to calm down because he's giving him a ride, so don't be banging on his pickup. He then went another 50 yards down the road, and the same thing happened again. This time he stepped on the brakes real quick, and this person lost its balance in the back. My uncle rolled down his window and yelled out, "Don't do that." The person then just tapped the top of the cab once, and my uncle kept going. Then, it happened again. This time it was really loud to the point where my uncle could see the cab roof on the inside move from the banging. My uncle jammed on his brakes really hard to a complete stop. He knew the person lost its balance, to the point where he grabbed the side of the cab. My uncle could see its waist and legs through the mirror. He then rolled down his window again, and yelled at the person to get out of his truck and walk. My uncle then said that he saw something from the corner of his eye, and when he turned to look, in the rear view mirror, there was a completely bleached white face, with its hands on the window, and staring directly into the cab at him through the mirror. My uncle's instant reaction was to jam on the gas and haul ass. As he did, my uncle said every few seconds he would look in the mirror, and that face was staring back at him, smiling. He didn't look back no more. He just completely sped through the little valley, back towards Porcupine. My uncle said that somewhere along the way, the person with the bleached white face and hands disappeared and left the truck. The only other weird thing that happened was his pack of cigarettes was missing. He never did take the back road again. He would go all the way around on the paved road if he had to do business in Gordon. It didn't matter if it was broad daylight. He never went through that road again. My uncle made the journey home a few years ago. I'm not sure exactly what he saw that night, and this is why I tell people always, if you survive the REZ, you can survive anything. Thanks for listening. I was in a college that was located away from major cities. The woods were all around us. With that being said, there was a highly rated trail, the Loyal Sock Trail, which was about an hour drive from the university. I invited a friend to come with me as he had never been on a backpacking trip, at least not to a 50+ mile trail that we were going to backpack over the 4-day weekend. I am an Eagle Scout who has spent countless hours in the woods and gone on many backpacking trips. As many have said before me, you get used to the scary things happening, the coyote sounds, raccoons in the middle of the night, even the noises that we can't pinpoint. The scariest thing to find in the woods, however, are people. We were about 20 miles into the trail, and being in Pennsylvania where the underbrush and trees line the trails, I always walk about 100 meters off the trail to reduce the chances of me disturbing people and people disturbing me, especially in the early morning when I choose to sleep in. Following the same strategy, my friend and I go out of our way to be in this amazing spot, a good ways off the trail where it would even be difficult to see our flashlights from the trail. This spot was on a peninsula where a creek met a river, meaning that there was only one way into our camp and only one way out. We start a fire, cook our food, and drink some alcohol, but not enough to get either of us drunk. We put the fire out about midnight and we head into our own tent. All is quiet. It is the fall semester, so leaves are on the ground. The moon is brightly shining through the bare trees, and the air is pretty cool. The only noise is the occasional time when I would hear my friend turn over in his sleep. Then, I hear the voices. The voices sounded very close for being on the trail 100+ meters away. I check my watch. It's 3 a.m. Who even hikes at 3 in the morning? I slowly get out of my sleeping bag, slowly unzip my tent, only to see my friend peeking out of his own tent in the same fashion. He quickly moves his finger over his mouth, signaling for me to be quiet. He then used the same hand to motion towards the way of the trail. That's when we see them, 4 people, 4 adults, 3 men and 1 woman. They're walking directly towards our camp. There's no lights illuminating their path. They are walking quiet at this point. Only one of them has a backpack. Impossible for the long hike they were 1/3 of the way through. Being a trip that was going to take a few days, you bring wood cutting supplies to chop branches into smaller branches to burn. This was my survival knife. I grabbed the knife. These people then walk into our site. They sit down by the fire pit and just sit there for what felt like an eternity. My friend then speaks up and is asking them what they're doing here in our campsite without answering the question. Having packed as lightly as possible for the long trip, we only had a few extra Mountain House, MRE style meals. I grab one out of my bag and toss it to one of the men. I then ask them why they're not using a light or anything, or if they need help finding the trail, and why they're also hiking so late. They respond with the following. 1. We don't use lights. We know where the trail is. It's better to hike late at night. Unnerved at this point, my friend told them that they have to leave. They respond by asking if we want to light the fire and hang out for a bit. No we don't. They grab their bag, get up, and leave without saying anything. We watch them leave and take turns making sure that they don't come back. Needless to say, we both got very little sleep that night. When the sun rose the next morning, we finally got some real sleep. By the afternoon, when we woke up, it all felt like a weird dream of sorts. The only evidence was a fuzzy cap that they must have dropped that I have to this day. I never had something as weird or scary as that happen in the woods, and I hope it never happens again. It's been 8 years since that trip, and I have never gone back to the Loyalsock Trail. Make sure you pray and smudge after listening to this. On the REZ, you know those shadows you see from the corner of your eye? The ones that whisper to you evil thoughts. Have you ever seen them take a form or a shape? I haven't, but I want to share something with you all that is somewhat tied into this whole thing. And I want to see if anybody has experienced anything like this. It didn't exactly scare me, but it had me hoping and praying that I never come across something like this. Because to be honest, I'm not sure what my reaction would be. So I guess it did put some fear in me. Because again, I'll just tell you. This comes from when I worked with the Naaldlooshii tribal court as a prosecutor out here on the Pine Ridge. I want to give you some background and information about what I'm going to share with you. I think it will make much more sense and give you a better picture of everything. My office at that time was located in the Coyote Correctional Facility. The police station was here along with the dispatch center for the eastern side of the REZ. The Coyote Correctional Facility is an old building that was built in the late 70s. Back then, it housed the police department, the tribal court, the prosecutor's office, and the jail under one building. As time went by, the tribe built a new courthouse, and the court staff moved out. The old courtroom and offices became the prosecutor's office. It was another slow Friday afternoon. Everything was finishing up, and the court staff were working on the release papers, and for those being held on bond as well. I was taking a break and went into the dispatch area to get a cup of coffee when I walked into the sergeant that was in charge of the jail area, and the correction officers were sitting down drinking coffee. His name was Ron. He was a good guy who took care of the people that were brought in by the police officers. Ron was known as a good guy and was highly respected in the community. Ron has since passed on, by the way. On this afternoon, Ron told me to sit down and take a break. I sat down, and we were talking about things that happened during the day. As always, the topics that come up are freaky stories that happen to officers. On days like that, it's good to listen because the REZ becomes a different place at night. During the day, reports of UFOs, ghost cars, Bigfoot, and other strange things get reported to the police. That's what we deal with up here. Depending what tribe and REZ you're in, down south you might be dealing with the witches of the Navajo REZ. Well, on this day we shared quite a few stories. There were several stories that Ron told me that afternoon, including stories about the women's cells being haunted. One cell was never used. When women were brought in, they always avoided that one cell, no matter how crowded the women's cells got. No one would use that one cell. From the cell, the women would tell the corrections officer about hearing a woman screaming coming from that cell. Others who actually stayed in the cell would hear whispers, get touched by something, and if they stayed there, they would get hit by something or someone. The women's security cell, which was used for women who were trying to harm themselves, was actually housed in that cell. The corrections officer would do cell checks on everyone every 15 minutes, and the officer would never look towards the women's security cell, especially when they came out of the booking area. Those corrections officers that did would sometimes see a woman peeking out the little glass window from the security cell. Let me just say this, the jail became a different place after the sun went down. On this night, during the midnight shift, the officers brought in a suicidal young man. The corrections officer that night was a woman named Brenda. I did adjust her name, by the way. The officers helped her book in the young man. She asked him why he was there, and he told her that he wanted to kill himself to get away. Brenda did ask him, "What do you want to get away from?" The young man went on to explain that there was this evil little man that was bothering him. Apparently, this little man was encouraging him to hurt people and to kill himself on a daily basis. Brenda told him that he would be safe here, and with the officer's help, she took him to the men's security cell on a mental hold. She put him in the cell, closed the door, and the young man asked her to please leave the lights on in his cell. The lights kept the little man away from him when he was sleeping. Brenda agreed to it, mainly to help him stay calm. The jail was almost full that night, and she was the only one there during the midnight shift. Brenda's shift was done at 8 in the morning. There was a shift change. They no longer had an extra correctional officer come in at 8 and work until 4 in the morning. So Brenda started her cell checks for the shift, checking on each prisoner in the jail. She peeked in on the young man on suicide watch and saw that he was sleeping. Brenda went to each cell, checking on whoever was in there. She completed her cell checks and wrote it down in her logbook. On the next cell check, she checked on the young man once again. He was still sleeping. Brenda went back to the booking area to fill out her log again after completing the cell checks. Knowing the young man was sleeping and wouldn't notice, she turned off the lights in all the cells. Around 2 a.m., she heard a loud scream coming from the male security cell. Brenda got up quickly and went to check on the young man. He was screaming, "Leave me alone." She got there and peeked into the cell. The young man was at the other end of the cell, screaming and kicking at something in the dark. Brenda got her flashlight out and shined it into the cell. The young man saw the light and screamed at her to turn on the lights. She opened the cell door and stood in the doorway. As soon as the door opened, the screaming stopped. The young man looked at her in fear and told her, "I told you to leave the lights on. Now he's followed me here." Brenda looked at him. His eyes were wide open. He was also breathing really fast, and she could see his stomach going in and out through his t-shirt. "Who's here?" The young man told her that it was the little man who was telling him to kill himself. He told her that he was sleeping when he felt something hit him on his side. He said he thought it was her, so he rolled over, and standing over him was that little man. He was dressed like a correction officer, and he also had a nightstick, which is what he hit the young man with. "Do you actually think that you could get away from me?" The little man then laughed and began to hit him as he stood over him on the cell bed. As the young man was screaming in pain, he told the little man that the corrections officer would hear him screaming for help. The little man just laughed more and continued to hit him. The young man made it off the bed and moved to the end of the cell, still screaming when Brenda shined her flashlight into the cell. As soon as the light from the flashlight shined into it, the little man disappeared as Brenda opened the door. Brenda just looked at the young man. It was obvious he was scared. Something happened to him. She told him it was just a bad dream. But that's when the young man screamed, "No, look at me." He lifted up his shirt, and she saw the red welts starting to form on his rib cage in the light of her flashlight. The red welts appeared to be from a nightstick on his rib cage. That's when Brenda gasped and told him to stay where he was. She closed the cell door, and the young man started screaming again as the door was locked, and darkness returned to the cell. He began screaming again, yelling, "Leave me alone." Brenda ran back to the booking area to get the first aid kit and ran back to the security cell. The young man's screaming was getting more loud, and it woke everyone up. When she opened the cell door, the young man was still screaming, and she thought she heard a faint sound of something hitting him as the door opened. The young man was lying on the floor, obviously in pain, semi-conscious. She tried to wake him up, but he was just lying there in pain. Brenda left the cell door open and went back to the booking area to call for an ambulance. As she came out the cell door, the other inmates had peeked out the little cell door window. As she was walking past the doors, the ones peeking out started yelling at her. She couldn't make out what they were saying. She was more concerned about getting medical attention for the young man. The male inmates then started yelling and pounding on the cell door, yelling at her and pointing behind her as she walked by. Thinking that the young man had regained consciousness, she turned around and walked back to the cell. This caused the male inmates to yell, scream, and pound louder on their cell doors. They kept pointing behind her. Brenda looked into the cell, and the young man was still out. She then started walking back to the booking area. They were still yelling at her. She had enough to deal with, so she went to the cell door. When the men saw that she was coming, they quit pounding on the door and ran to the other end of the cell. She opened the door and started asking them what was wrong. They looked behind her and started pointing, beginning to scream and yell at her to close the door. She just shook her head and closed the door. Brenda then made her way back to the booking area, called for the ambulance, then notified the dispatcher to call for the midnight shift officer to come back and assist her with the young man. She turned on the lights in the male section and waited by the cell. There was a knocking on the sally port door. She left the young man alone in the cell to open the door. The midnight shift police officer walked in, and she told him what happened. The officer walked back with her to the security cell, where they went to check on the young man. He was still semi-conscious. She then lifted up his shirt to show the officer the red welts. By then, they were turning dark and beginning to bruise. The officer, whose name was John, just shook his head. His explanation was that the young man was most likely throwing himself against the cell bed again, which is what made the red marks on his body. After about 25 minutes, the ambulance got there. They assessed the inmate and decided that they would take him to the hospital. The inmate was loaded into the ambulance and transported to the hospital. Brenda made a note in her shift log about what happened with the inmate. It was around 4 in the morning when she was finally able to get back to doing her cell checks on the rest of the prisoners. As she approached the male day room cell, she could see one of them standing by the door, looking out at her. He was waving his hands to call her over. His name was Joe. She opened the door and asked him what was wrong. She could see that the other inmates were still up and huddled in a circle at the back of the room. Joe then asked Brenda, "Didn't you see it?" "See what?" All the other inmates turned and stared at her when she said that. Joe took a deep breath. "That ugly, evil little man that was following you. That's why we were screaming at you. We were trying to tell you to look behind you." Brenda then asked him again, "What little man?" Joe looked at her and said, "The little man who was wearing a uniform like you, but he was swinging his nightstick at you as you kept walking. We thought he was going to kill you. Then when you turned around, we thought you saw him, but he was still walking behind you. Then when you came down to us, we got freaked out because you were standing there asking what was wrong. He was looking at us from behind your legs and pointing at us. That ugly little man was telling us to shut up, that whoever told you what was behind you would be the next one that he would come after." Brenda was in shock. She didn't tell the officer or ambulance crew what the young man had said about the little man. She tried to laugh it off, and then told him he was just seeing things. That's when Joe got mad. "Brenda, I never lied to you. We all saw him." The other inmates nodded their heads in agreement. Joe went on to say that while Brenda and the officer were checking on the inmate, the little man was walking back and forth behind them, swinging the baton. He had an evil smile on his face. Then, when the ambulance crew showed up, as they were loading the young man on the ambulance, and they strapped him in, he saw that little man jump on the young man's chest as he was wheeled out of the jail. Brenda thanked him for telling her and went back to the booking area. She called dispatch on the intercom to find out about the inmate. Brenda was told that the young man had regained consciousness, but was screaming and yelling and getting combative with the crew, so an officer rode with them to the hospital to help restrain the young man. The young man was yelling for something to get off of him, but he was strapped in and couldn't move. This is when Brenda started believing everything. I know I got scared when Ron told me the story. Shit, this whole wave of fear just came back while writing this out. You know what? With that, I'll finish the story here, and I hope no one gets any nightmares tonight when you fall asleep. On the REZ, my dad was the life of the party during his younger days, way before I was brought into this world. He told me they would go through the backroads on the REZ, and everyone would meet up late at night. One of those nights, my dad, 2 of his brothers, and 1 of their friends were on their way to a party. They left town for the backroads. On the way, they came across a man dressed in a black trench coat with long hair covering his face. He was walking alongside the road going the opposite direction they were headed. My dad said they stopped the car. They asked where he was headed and if he wanted to join them for a party. The man agreed to go. They talked, they laughed, and they were having a good time. When they pulled up to the spot where everyone was waiting, they got out the car and introduced the man. Music was playing, the fire was going, everyone was talking, drinking, and dancing. They offered the man beers throughout the night. After a few, he started to act a little bit strange. His face wasn't covered by his hair anymore. My dad said he had a mean look on his face. One of the guys offered him another beer, and he dropped it on the ground. My dad reached down to pick it up, and he noticed that this man had some sort of hoofs for feet. My dad said he freaked out. He stood up and looked this man in the eyes. The man smiled and turned away. My dad told his friend what he had seen. At this point, they were both shocked. That's when the man told him that he would be back, and he was going to go over the hill to use the bathroom. Once he left, he told everyone they all had to leave now. Everyone loaded up and left that area as fast as they could. They ended up back on the same dirt road that they had came through. When they got to the same area where they had picked up this man, he was there again, standing in the exact same spot. My dad said they didn't stop. They drove by him, not even looking back. By the time that they got home, one vehicle after another pulled in. They asked what happened back there, and that's when my dad told them everything. He said everyone didn't want to go outside after that. Personally, I believe he saw what he said. I believe there's unexplained things out there. Have you, or anyone you know, had such an encounter like this before? Let me know. So there's this abandoned oil rig in the woods right down the road from my house. My buddy David showed it to me when we were in high school. He said it was part of his dad's property, and that he always used to play back there when he was a kid, and that it was also perfectly safe. David was also a compulsive liar, and he would lie about the stupidest, just to see if he could get away with it. Anyways, he told me and my two buddies, Chris and Kyle, that we could use it whenever we wanted to. So this happened back in 2011, when my buddies and I are in college. We don't really talk to David anymore. In fact, we're pretty sure that he moved out of the state, but we haven't spoken to him in so long that we weren't sure. We still continue to use his little oil rig spot. At this point, it's just a peaceful, comfortable, and quiet place to chill. Chris was always the one driving, and I was always shotgun. It was getting pretty late. We always leave before it gets dark because the woods in this area get creepy as hell. But we had been drinking for a while, and Chris wanted to wait for another 30 or 40 minutes before we drove anywhere just to make sure that he was sober. We all decided to step outside of his car for a cigarette. And this is when things started getting weird. We were all talking about one of Kyle's past girlfriends and making fun of him, and that's when we heard the sound. But at this point, we couldn't really tell you even what it sounded like, simply because we were all laughing when we heard it. It was just loud enough for us to hear it. Kyle must have heard it better than Chris because, as soon as it happened, he had tossed his cigarette and knelt back into the car. Chris and I just stood staring off into the woods to see if we could hear it again. Unfortunately, we did. It sounded like a small or medium-sized dog at first. I think that Chris and I were both nervous that we might learn the hard way that David was full of it. This feeling didn't last very long. The howling quickly went from a howling sound to a growling sound. It wasn't something that any native animal could make under any normal circumstances. I still don't know what that sound was, but I'm 90% sure that either monsters are real or I just heard an animal get killed. Either way, I got back in the car. Chris, on the other hand, didn't think anything of it. He laughed at us and teased us from outside the car, making your standard generic boogeyman jokes. He tells us it was likely David being a dick and trying to scare us and that we were just mistaken about him moving away. Chris is the kind of person who thinks he's a little smarter than he actually is. I don't know if it's because he wanted to prove to us that it wasn't a monster, or if he's just an idiot, but he actually went off to look for the source of the sound. I tried to reason with him, saying that it must have not been anything paranormal, but that it could have very well been like a psycho or a pissed off animal or something. But he went off anyways. So Chris had gone for about 5 minutes before Kyle and I began to get worried. 5 minutes isn't a long time, but he should have been back by then. He could have gone up to David's house, knocked on his door, and wrestled back down to the car in that amount of time. After about 10 minutes of texting and calling with no response, we decided to go look for him. We both get out of the car, and sure enough, there's Chris just kind of standing there beside the oil rig itself. It was dark, so I guess we just didn't notice him while we were in the car. At this point, Kyle and I are feeling mixed emotions. We're glad to see him, but we're both pissed off that he was gone for so long. We then bombard him with questions like, "What happened? What did you find? What took you so long?" He answered most of them with shrugs or stares, even though we were able to get him to answer a few questions. But he still didn't say much. He just told us that he got lost and didn't hear his phone. Whatever, we thought. At this point, all Kyle and I wanted to do was go home, but Chris wanted to keep looking around the woods, and he was actually trying to get me to go with him. We stood around for ages arguing and begging him to take us back home, and the more we talked, the more uncomfortable Kyle and I were getting. There's something not right about Chris. He's talking differently, like the tone of his voice is a bit more scratchier, and the things he is saying are downright strange. He's coming up with the weirdest imaginable reasons to why we should go into the woods, asking us if we need to use the bathroom, or if we wanted to see a dead animal, or something stupid that he found out there. It was at this point that I decided that I'm just gonna walk home, and I texted Kyle about how Chris was being weird as hell, and that we need to ditch him and go back to my place. He agreed with me, so we agreed to follow him into the woods, but we just lagged behind him as much as possible. The woods were pretty thick and almost pitch black, so it wasn't hard to lose him and get back out into the main road. Halfway during the walk back to my house, I get a phone call. It's Chris. I answer, and he's asking where the hell we went. I told him he was being creepy as hell, so we just left. He had no idea what we were talking about. He said that he came back to his car, and that we were just gone. He ended up dropping by my place, and we continued drinking there. We ended up arguing for like 10 minutes. He insisted that we explain on how he was being creepy. We did give him examples, and he said, "You guys are full of it. Y'all just trying to scare me. It's not gonna work." It didn't happen. We eventually just dropped it because he was starting to get pissed off. He thought that it was a joke and that the joke had been going on for way too long. We still go back there every now and then, and we'll hear that noise whenever we go for a smoke, maybe around 2 or 3 times a year. There's even sometimes when I hear it when I'm back home. It doesn't scare me enough not to finish my cigarette, but it is enough for me to keep my front door cracked open while I'm just standing outside, just in case I have to get back inside quickly. As for the sound itself, I heard it so many times that I'm pretty sure that it's some kind of animal being killed, but I still can't really think of any real explanation. We don't have any real apex animals over here, not any that would go prey on dogs at least. Maybe it's a coyote fighting with something, but if anybody has any possible explanation, I would like to hear it. And if you're wondering where this happened, it happened around September of 2012, a couple of hours north of Akron, Ohio. Why do you need to cover your mirrors when someone passes away on the REZ? Well, the same reason why you shouldn't wear glasses when viewing someone who has passed away. You don't want the person to see themselves dead. You can actually trap them here. This is how we grew up, and we were told to follow all these rules. They aren't just rules, it's a way of living. But I do have a question, and I want to see if anyone might know. So my grandma used to say a lot of things that we're not supposed to do, like don't play hide and seek at night, don't whistle at night, don't talk or scream at the north lights. And also, I remember when I was younger, every time there would be a thunderstorm, she would put sheets over all the mirrors at home. She doesn't do this anymore. I asked her about it a few times, about some of this stuff, and she really can't remember why she did that, or even some of the other stuff she didn't really have an answer for, unless she didn't want to tell me. Anyways, she also used to say not to wash clothes at night. She said you're getting ready for a funeral, and so to this day, I still don't wash my clothes at night. So I'm just wondering, why do we practice this? Any answers would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. I wasn't sure where to post this, but I needed a validation that I'm not insane. I never really had a paranormal experience, but I can't explain this. I'm in college, and me and some other 7 people from my school went on a backpacking trip, and we had to experience leaders. We drove to the Saleski State Forest, which is in the Appalachian region of Ohio. It was early April this year, and it was cold and everything was still dead from winter. After hiking miles in the forest, we set up camp at the backpacking campsite. There were a few other groups of people as well. A few of them were friendly, older couples and then 2 college-age girls. Everyone was pretty spread out from each other. We set up camp further away from everyone else. I always been able to sense the energy of places, and the energy in this area wasn't great. It was almost spooky. Every single one of us had a 1-person tent, and we formed kind of a cluster in the side, with my tent being in the back, so no one was behind me. Our cluster was also right next to the forest, because this backpacking site was like a big cleared off square in the middle of the trees. Anyways, I'm dead asleep around 2 a.m., and I wake up to the leaves crunching right beside my tent. I hear footsteps walking in circles around me. They had a sort of heaviness to them. I know it couldn't be a dog or a deer. Also, it sounded like it just had 2 legs. I swear I'm not making this up. This thing was circling my tent for long periods of time, slowly creeping up to the sides of it, and then just stopping for a while, and then it would move on to waking around the rest of our tent cluster. I could hear a human-like breathing from the mouth when it was close to my tent, like a light sort of heaving. I was shaking, too scared to open my tent and look around. I kid you not, this went on for hours, and it seemed like I was the only one awake. Out of nowhere, I see an illuminated light shape from my tent, even though I couldn't tell what it was from inside, because it was all zipped up. It was like a warm glow, and it didn't move like a flashlight would. I was paralyzed in fear. I simply couldn't believe it was an animal. At some point I ended up falling asleep, but I know I could still hear the heavy footsteps around me. In the morning, I started asking my fellow campers about it, and my leader admitted she heard the footsteps and noises as well, admitting it was bizarre, and she would have investigated had she not been so groggy. One of the boys in the group said he also noticed the light that came on, but he thought it was someone else. Not a single person in this group went up to go to the bathroom or turned on a light that night. I heard things about the Appalachian regions. Strange, creepy, and bizarre. And now I believe it. Some people on here have leaned towards Bigfoot because apparently he's associated with light orbs. I've never been a Bigfoot believer, but I am telling you, this whole thing didn't feel like it was just some sort of animal. Not even a bear. I'm gonna tell you something that happened to me this summer, and I swear it scared the hell out of me, so hold on tight, because this is gonna be a bit long. So this summer, I decided to go camping alone in an isolated forest. I know, it's not the best idea for someone who easily makes films, but I needed to be with myself, to get away from everybody in the world. I did find a spot on a wild camping app that looked perfect, quiet, far from everything, with a beautiful view and no neighbors nearby. Basically, paradise to escape from the daily stress. I arrived there late in the afternoon. I set up my tent, got a campfire going, and settled in for the evening. The sun was slowly setting, and the forest was starting to get dark. It was really quiet too. Too quiet. There was not a sound, not even the singing of birds. I found it a bit weird, but I figured maybe it was just the serenity of nature. After eating, I sat around the fire and just watched the flames to relax. That's when I started hearing strange noises. At first, there were some creaking sounds, as if someone or something was walking between the trees. I figured it was most likely some animals, so I didn't pay too much attention to it. But as the night progressed, the noises became more persistent. Creaking sounds, almost like footsteps, but they seemed to circle around the camp. I tried to turn on my flashlight, but the battery was almost dead. I figured maybe it was another camper or hiker who got lost, so I decided to go check it out, so I wouldn't spend the night wondering what it was. I went a little deeper into the woods with my light. The further I went, the more weird everything else became. The trees seemed to close in around me, and the ground was very muddy. I felt like someone or something was following me, but every time that I turned around, there was nothing, just darkness. Suddenly, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. A blurry silhouette between the trees. I couldn't make out the details, but it was obvious a human form, barely even visible in the darkness. That's when my heart started racing, and I decided to quickly turn around. I didn't even wait to see if this figure moved or not. I went back to my tent as quickly as possible. When I arrived at my camp, I noticed something even more creepier. My tent had been undone. Everything was untied, and the sleeping bag was scattered. I did stay up all night, lying in my sleeping bag, listening to every noise, every crack. The next morning, I quickly gathered my things and left as fast as I could. I'm not sure what it was like that night. I'm not even sure what happened, or what I saw. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Or maybe I stumbled upon something much more scarier. Well, I'm never gonna go camping in this forest again. If anyone has a similar story, or knows what was causing these noises, I'm interested. I'll see y'all later, and always be careful where you go camping. Since I was a kid, it seemed like spirits or a ghost was a common occurrence. I actually thought it was normal for things like that to happen, until I was the only person telling ghost stories. This whole thing has just gotten worse as an adult. There was a shadow man that liked to stare at me, and when I finally moved out, I took one look back and saw the shadow man staring at me from the kitchen. Being in a new place, I was excited that I could breathe a lot better. It seemed, however, every time that I was happy, something awful would happen, and I would start sinking into a place of unhappiness. Well, for the past weeks, things haven't been pleasant, and something does bother me at night. It walks around and touches my family. I came on here to share my story and maybe get some advice. What would be the best thing to fight against things from occurring? Am I feeding it with my depression? Can whatever this thing is cause health issues? I've been told that we can get used to the bad spirits, to the point that we can't see or feel them anymore, even if they live with us. It's actually really scary, because I've seen shadow people twice in my apartment. That was 8 years ago. I wonder if they're still around. Also, when I was a very young child, maybe around 4 or 5, I saw a pair of green glowing eyes staring at me from the dark hallway. I still remember it. I was crying and screaming like crazy. Now when I think about it, I might be living with who knows what, and not even know it. What are your thoughts on it? Let me know. Do y'all think it's possible that a skinwalker can follow you in your dream, as well as in the city? Last night I had a dream about one. It was my girlfriend and I back at home on the REZ. We're going to bed, but we decided to put our bed next to the window, so I decided to sleep close to the window. So in a few hours I woke up, because I just had this weird vibe that there was something outside the window. I tried not thinking too much of it, and I tried going back to bed. Then, all of a sudden, I felt something grab my shoulder and my shirt, and it was trying to pull me out the window. I was facing my girlfriend when this thing was trying to pull me out the window. I tried yelling out for help, but I couldn't say anything. I tried holding on to the window with everything that I could. Then, I finally woke up. I sat up and my heart was beating so fast, and I was also very sweaty at the same time. I know this sounds crazy, and even though it was just a dream, it just felt so real. was 1998. We were teenagers in high school in North Arizona. We knew about skinwalkers, but we never saw one, so we thought it was just rumors and stories to scare us. One night, we were driving through the back roads, screaming, "F the skinwalkers." We had a good laugh and thought everything would be fine. Then, 2 nights later, I was in my room watching TV, and I heard some loud banging on my wall. I ran to the living room to see what was going on. The backyard window was open, and my sister was screaming. I looked outside to the backyard and saw our German Shepherd dog, lifeless, being dragged off of our patio by a shadow figure. This thing looked at us, and it ran off. Our dog began shaking for a couple of minutes, then got up like nothing was wrong. I told my friend about it the next day, and he said that he heard drumming all night, the same night that my dog got dragged. Ever since then, I don't fuck around. You've been told not to whistle at night, and maybe you never knew why. Well, I heard that whistling is a way that skinwalkers communicate. I'm not sure if this is real, but let me tell you all something. When I was 10 years old, my cousin at that time was 14, 15 maybe. I can't really remember. Anyways, she and I were sitting outside of my grandma's house by the back door. My grandmother lives on the REZ in a small town. Her house was on the outside of this town, where one street light only went so far, and the surrounding area was pitch black. It was breezy that night. We sat outside, talking about the whole whistling at night thing. We did wonder what would happen if we did it. She wanted to see, and of course I didn't. I told her it was a bad idea, but she didn't care. She whistled. We didn't hear anything, except for the wind. She began to convince me that it was just something our grandmother told us to scare us. All of a sudden, we hear a whistle back in the distance. We both brushed it off, thinking no way that was a whistle. After all, the wind was blowing pretty strong. A few minutes passed and she whistled. Nothing. She whistled again. Not even a minute later, we both heard this loud whistle right around the corner from where we were sitting at. We both got up quickly, and we ran inside and locked the door behind us. We damn well knew what was out there, and we weren't about to go check it out. The rest of the summer we were inside before the sun went down. Thinking back on it now, that was a stupid move, but we did learn our lesson. Since we're talking about shadow people, I want to share this experience. It was around 12 or 1 in the morning. I got thirsty, so I went to the kitchen. I remember the living room being pitch black, and as I walked towards the fridge, I heard someone say, "Hey," very softly. I turned around and said, "What the fuck was that?" But I just brushed it off. As I walked by the fridge in the laundry room, it was pitch black there too. Sometimes the street light glows in, but there was no light at all. And literally, as I stood there about to open the fridge, I heard the voice again, "Hey," right by my ear. I could even feel the breath on my neck. I ran back to my room, locked my door, and started freaking out. From time to time, I see shadow figures in my house, and mainly when I'm by myself. I see them in my bathroom, closet, the living room, and sometimes on the ceiling, or just standing in the dark corner. I dream of them, and I see them. Not to mention, as I came back from the hospital, I thought I saw someone coming down the front door steps, but I checked around the yard and the house. Nobody. It was 11:30 p.m. You can say I'm doing fine, but definitely creeped out as fuck. Alcohol was illegal on the REZ back then, back in the 1970s. By the way, my friend gave me permission to share this with people before he passed away. If a stranger ever approaches you at night on the REZ, don't forget to look at their feet. It might sound weird, but it might save your life. It's always the legs. If their legs are not normal, or their legs look like those of a deer, at that point it might be too late. You see, on the REZ, evil spirits surround alcohol and drugs. They're drawn to that type of energy, but not just the spirits, other things as well. I'm not even sure what to call them. You might know them as deer people or the deer woman. I live up in Pine Ridge. It's full of pine trees, cedar trees, and a creek that runs through the entire community. The creek is about 25 miles long, with some water running from the south to the north end of the REZ, ending at a place called the Badlands. The creek meets up with the White River, which runs west to east along the north side of the REZ. Running south to north is a road known as 27, which runs from US Highway 18 to the north, where it meets up with US Highway 44. By the way, this happened in the late 1970s. Yeah, I guess I'm telling my age here. 27 is the main way of travel when people are going to Rapid City. However, it also takes you right to a local border town known as Scenic. It's pretty much a ghost town these days, as many of the people living there have either passed on or moved away. However, in the late 1970s, it was a wild place. Alcohol was illegal on the REZ back then, so we would go there to party or get beer, and then go back home. It was a Friday night, and my friend George, that's not his actual name, but I'll just call him that, well, he went there to have a good time. I didn't go with him that day because I was really tired, or something about it just felt off, so I chose not to go. Remember, this was the 70s, no phones or anything, especially up here in Pine Ridge. All of us were poor, and going out and about was the only thing that we could do, so he ended up catching a ride with friends. But throughout the night, they left without him. At least that's what he told me. So he said he didn't know he was left behind until the bar closed at 2:30 a.m. Most of the cars had already left for the REZ, and those who were still there didn't want to give him a ride. I'm starting to think he had caused or done something, but he claimed he was pretty chill the whole night. So he just started walking back to the REZ. The REZ line was about 7 miles away. As he was walking, the night started to get lighter as he moved through the Badlands. The Badlands are full of buttes, deep water runoff canyons, pinnacles, and spires. It's similar to the Southwest, but gets a little more water throughout the year. There were cedar trees and cottonwood trees along the tops of the buttes or hillsides. It took him about 2 hours to get to the REZ line. By then, the sky was getting lighter. He wasn't buzzed no more, and he was also getting tired. But at the same time, he said he was mad that no one wanted to give him a ride. He had walked another 2.5 miles when he finally got to the top of a hill known as Shoe Hill. He was halfway across Shoe Hill when he noticed a truck coming towards the main road. From a dirt road that went to the southeast across the hill, the truck got to the main road and turned in his direction. As it got closer, it slowed down beside him and stopped. The driver motioned to him and pointed down the road. George opened up the passenger door of the old Ford truck. The driver asked if he had gotten left behind, and that if he needed a ride. He told him yes and got in. The driver was a ranch hand who had gotten up early to check on his cattle. His herd was about 3 miles south of Shoe Hill, but he gave George a ride about 3 miles north of a place called Rocky Ford. After George got out, the truck turned around and went back north. Georgia was about 3 miles north of a bridge that crossed the dry creek bed. He could see it as the sun was starting to rise to the east. The walk to the bridge didn't take long. He stopped to rest. To the east were more badlands, but to his right was a butte that was covered in cedar, elm, and cottonwood trees. He was tired, so he decided to walk up the hill, find a place to lie down, sleep for a bit, and then keep walking. It took him about 20 minutes to climb up the hill and find a place under the cedar and elm trees to lay down. He lay down and went to sleep. His sleep, however, didn't last too long. As he was sleeping, something tugged on his foot a few times. He kicked out the next time and nudged his foot. He then heard someone step back and nudge his foot again. He kicked out again and yelled at whoever it was to leave him alone. He opened his eyes. Standing a few feet away was a woman, the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, or so he claims. He said he sat up fast, and she stepped back a few feet more. He looked at her and asked who she was, but she didn't answer. She just moved her head to the side and just stared at him. And so my friend just stared back, checking her out. Had long brown hair, brown eyes. This wasn't what caught his attention though. It was the way she was dressed, in a buckskin dress from the 1800s. That really did throw him off. He thought he was dreaming until she smiled at him and actually moved closer. "Who are you?" But she just looked at him and tilted her head again. He asked her again, but the look on her face told him that she didn't understand him. So he ended up asking in Lakota. She then smiled as if she finally understood him, but still didn't respond. Instead, she looked at him and then down towards the road. Then, in a very low voice, she asked if he came from there. He nodded and said yes. She then asked why he had left the road to come up the hill. He told her he was tired and looking for a place to rest before continuing his walk. She told him that she understood, but that he needed to go back down the road, and that he needed to do it right now. My buddy told her that he would, but only after he got some sleep. But that's when she kept insisting that he must leave. He refused. Then the woman asked him if he would leave, if she was to also go with him. She smiled again, motioned for him to follow her, and started walking down the hill. My buddy said that he stood there for a bit, thinking to himself, when was the last time he refused to do what a pretty Lakota woman asked him to do? So he started down the hill. She looked at him and smiled again. They walked together towards the bridge. When they got to the road, she asked him which way he was going. He pointed towards Scenic and told her about the night of drinking. As he spoke, her face darkened with anger. She ended up stepping further back. Then she asked if he was going back that way. He shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm going home. I had enough." She then smiled at him. Then, that's when he said that he heard somebody else. The woman put her head down and looked up towards the hill. That's when George followed her gaze. At the spot where he had rested, a man was standing just watching them. He had long hair and was dressed in breechcloth and leggings. He held something in his hand, an antler. That's when the man began walking to them, and the woman told my friend to leave right now. That's when a truck appeared in the distance. The woman glanced at the truck, then back at the approaching man. That's when this man also saw it and stopped about 30 yards away. The old Ford truck screeched to a stop beside George. The ranch hand inside started yelling, "Get in! Get in!" My buddy said that he didn't know what to do, but the ranch hand screamed again, "Look at their feet!" That's when my friend glanced down. The woman and man had deer hoofs instead of human feet. That's when he jumped into the truck, just as the ranch hand floored it. The tires spun as they sped away. The ranch hand then shouted, "Look! Look! Look at them!" That's when my friend turned. In the truck's side mirror, he no longer saw a man and a woman, just a doe running up the hill, and a buck that was chasing after the truck before retreating. When they finally stopped at Rocky Ford School, the ranch hand explained that he had seen George following the doe down the hill with a buck that was coming after him. Ever since that day, my friend stopped going out and he stopped drinking. He stopped going out at night overall, and we became pretty distant after that. Again, this happened back in the 70s, and he didn't tell me until a few years back before he passed away. He wasn't the same after this, and I remember when he told me this, he also said, "You don't ever forget what you see out there on those hills." Out here on the REZ, we're taught from a young age that bitterness, jealousy, hatred, and anger, all those things, it's basically poison. It eats at your soul. It clouds your mind. Everybody and the elders say that we must learn to forgive, to let go of those dark feelings, especially because if we carry them, they can actually stay with us for a long time. They will follow you. They'll seep into your personal life, into your marriage, your job, your kids, and that's something that you don't want to do. I know you're familiar with the saying about taking things with you to the grave, but this is one thing you really don't want to do. One of the teachings that we have is that things don't always stay buried. Some people say that when we hold on to those feelings, they have a way of coming back, even after you have passed on, and not just them. But let me tell you about this experience that I had. This actually happened to me while still in junior high and high school between 1989 to 1993. It's a story that's a bit sad for me and creepy as hell at the same time. It is pretty long, but I gotta tell you all the details so you can get a sense of what happened. When I was in junior high school, I became friends with a guy who just moved into town. I remember first meeting him on the bus after school. I don't think he really knew anyone, so for a while he would sit with me on the bus ride home, and we eventually became good friends. As time went on, we would meet up after school with a little clique of neighborhood kids. We would play street football, baseball, basketball, or just hung out at each other's house or at a friend's house, playing video games. We had sleepovers and did what every kid did at 12 to 14 years old. As we grew up in junior high and slowly transitioned to high school, we made more friends, and over the summer break it was pretty quiet. I hadn't really seen my friend hanging around. I guess he made other friends that I didn't know about, so I mostly just hung around with the kids up and down my street. And my best friend, since I had him since the 3rd grade, and we're still really good friends to this day. It might seem like I'm dragging this on, but it'll make sense by the time that I'm done. One day in the hallway right after school started, I saw my friend that I had lost contact with over the summer, the same friend that I met on the bus. My best friend also knew him, and he also happened to befriend him as well. But that day, everything changed. As we approached them, I was expecting a friendly greeting. You know, how's it been? What you been up to? He proceeded to walk straight towards us and push this way between us both, bumping into our shoulders pretty hard like he was making some kind of statement or something. Me and my friend looked at each other like, what the fuck? And then he looked back at both of us with this go to hell look. We had no clue what this was about. Anyways, as time went on, we would hear from some people that he was talking smack about me, and some other people that I knew as well. Over time it got worse, to the point where he was turning my own friends against me. So that school year for me was weird, and it got to the point where I didn't feel safe walking down the hallways at school alone, or even in my own neighborhood for the fear of being cornered and jumped or something. He started hanging around with some shady people, and he started getting into a lot of trouble and got sent off to juvie or something. I never knew what for, but it couldn't be good. As time went on, we had pretty much became enemies. He hated me for some reason, but I never figured out why. So it finally got to the point one day at school where he cornered me at my locker with some of his shady friends, and we got into it. A pretty big fight that lasted quite a bit. We eventually were separated when teachers came rushing through the crowd to break us up. We both got lucky and separated before the teachers found out who was fighting. After that, he almost just disappeared. He dropped out of school, never to be heard from again, at least for another year. So everything calmed down, and come to find out, he was going to some school for troubled kids. I ran into him a year after at the end of the summer, while hanging out at a cousin's house. He came out of the dark walking with someone, and it kind of startled me because the last time we saw each other we got into it. My friend was with me, so he was talking with the other guy for a bit, and I just kind of stood there thinking, fuck, what's gonna go down? But nothing happened. Then fall rolled around in winter. Nothing from him though. And on Christmas Eve, something I never thought would happen happened. I found out the day after Christmas that he had been killed on Christmas Eve. Shot by someone as he was walking home late at night with his friend. He was shot with a .22 handgun, and the bullet struck his heart, which killed him. At first I couldn't even imagine something like that happening. In my neighborhood, that is. Let alone to someone who was once a really good friend. It bothered me both emotional and mentally. A few months went by. I was sleeping one night, and I woke up to a really bad cough and me gasping for air. I woke up and walked quickly into the living room where my mom and dad were still up watching TV, and they asked me if I was okay. I had stopped coughing by then, so I said yeah, I was fine, just a coughing fit. I didn't really think nothing of it, and I went back to bed. The next night, the same thing, except this time, I got up on my bed and started clawing at my room window, gasping for air. And I had opened the window and for some reason tried to crawl out, until I snapped out of it, that is. It was weird. So I go back to bed and I tell my mom and dad the next morning, and they ask me if I had a nightmare, a cold or something. But I told them that I felt fine. The same night went off without anything happening, but that was the only free night that I had for the next 3 nights. After getting ready for bed, my dad said try not to worry, and that they would take me to the doctor to get checked out. But that night, I had one more episode, a really bad one. I fell asleep and not even an hour later, I had jumped out of bed, ran down the hallway to the bathroom, jumped in the tub, and started clawing at the bathroom window, which was a tiny window. I was trying to crawl out according to my dad, who grabbed me away from the window and held me down. This whole time I was kicking, clawing, and gasping for air as my dad tried to wake me up. I finally did, and I just lay there looking at my dad, having no idea what I was doing. I scared the living crap out of my mom, dad, and mostly myself. So my mom and dad took me to the doctors the next day to have me checked out, but they couldn't find anything wrong with me. The doctor said that these kind of things only happen in younger children, so they said if it keeps happening to come back, and they'll do some testing and x-rays. So that night, I felt a little apprehensive to go to bed, but eventually had to since I had school the next day. I remember my mom burned some cedar on the stove, and pretty much walked around the house with it, smoking out all the rooms, so I felt a little bit better when I went to bed. But that night was the scariest. My dad had agreed to stay awake with my mom to watch over while I was sleeping. I guess sort of taking turns to check on me. Not even an hour after I fell asleep, I jumped out of bed and started clawing at my window again. This time, I could see what I was doing, and I jumped off of my bed gasping for air like I was being choked. I flung my room door open, ran towards the bathroom, and then turned around. By this time, my dad heard what was happening, and he was running down the hall to catch me. I started running towards him and slammed into his chest and arms as he caught me. We both hit the ground and I snapped out of it. You see, when he caught me, something hit him besides me. I was only 16, and I weighed about 110, so I wasn't very big at all. But something hit my dad hard and knocked the breath out of him. As we hit the floor, he said he looked behind him and saw something black going fast down the hallway, turning the corner into the living room, going to the front door. My dad gets up freaking out as my mom sat on the floor next to me, hugging me, helping me to get up. Just then, my dad tells us what happened and what ran through him and out the front door. I couldn't help but think I was being witched by someone or something. So I stayed up that late with my mom and dad most of the night, but sat and slept for a little in the living room on the sofa, while my mom and dad continued to watch over me sleep off and on throughout the night. So morning came around and I stayed home from school as I had not slept at all that night, and my dad took me to the doctor again. I had blood work done, x-rays, and they gave me some breathing treatments, but they couldn't find anything wrong with me. So later that night, my dad sits me down and talks with me. He then asks me if I have anything going on that's actually stressing me out, or if I'm worried about something, or if I'm involved with something that I'm not supposed to be involved in. But I couldn't think of anything. Then he brings up the death of my ex-friend. He then asked me if it bothered me, and I said yeah, at first it did, but now, not so much. So we talk about him for a while, and he says maybe that he's coming back and is bothering me. So he had my mom bring out some dried peyote. We sit there talking and it starts to take effect, and before I know it, I'm crying, saying that I wish that had never happened to him, and that I also wish that we had never drifted apart. My dad then tells me of an instance with him and an old co-worker, whom he had a few arguments with at work, but never settled it as she had passed away as well, which bothered him as well. Maybe not in the same way it did to me, but it did make him sick. He told me to pray and to ask God for forgiveness and to move on. So I did. I sat there whimpering, apologizing to him, telling him that I was sorry for everything that went on between us and sorry for what happened to him. I begged for his forgiveness and told him to move on and that I had forgiven him as well. I swear, I felt some weight lift off of me after that night, and since then, I have never been awoken at night by those scary fits. I'm pretty sure that's what was happening, even in death. He still hated me, and he was still trying to hurt me. But asking for his forgiveness and me making peace with him finally laid our bitterness towards each other to rest. This happened in the spring of 1993 when I was 16. I never did find out what happened with my friend, why he suddenly hated me after we had become so close. It's sad, if anything. But after talking with a few different people and going through some counsel, I come to the conclusion that more than likely, he befriended the wrong crowd when we went into high school. He had changed and I didn't understand why. Looking back though, I think it had something to do with witchcraft, or maybe a curse, or something else. I can't fully explain. I also found out something eerie about it. He wasn't just walking home like any other night. The person that he was walking with, he mentioned to the police that my friend kept saying that strange shadows were following them, moving fast, and the bullet that killed them hit him straight in the heart, but his hands were clutched in a strange position, almost like he was trying to hold something back. A medicine man said it was like the bullet had been guided by something darker. There were also rumors of an old curse that ran through the family, but you know how gossip and rumors are. People said that he was involved in things he shouldn't have been, things that the REZ has always kept quiet about. Never got the full story, and everything has been laid to rest, so there's no reason for me to continue looking around or trying to figure out why. I have a story that I would like to tell you that happened to me recently. I live in the state of Georgia, in a tiny city called Dawsonville. I think there's about 3,000 people maximum living there as of 2024, but it could be a little less than that. I didn't exactly go around counting, if you know what I mean. Anyways, to cut to the chase and give you all the goods, there's this place nearby called Dawson Forest that you may have possibly heard of before. It's about a 20-minute drive from my city, but it is home to some crazy rumors that I could just not help trying to check out for myself. I'll give a little bit more background information, and then I'll get into the story. In the late 1950s, the United States Air Force bought a property inside Dawson Forest, and they built what used to be a secret research facility. I believe it was called the Georgia Nuclear Aircraft Lab. It's been out of commission for about more than 50 years. But those who live around this area have ventured into the forest. They always talk about rumors about strange lights and creatures. I even heard talks of deer that grew a second head. Something about the radiation in the area. Back when it was built, everything nuclear was top secret, especially with the growing tensions of the Cold War. They wanted the facility to be built somewhere where no one could snoop around. But of course, this didn't stop rumors from circulating when some locals caught wind of the facility. I'm only 22, but my family has lived there for years and years, and they have all told me the stories. More information on this place is available online. You can actually look up everything that I'm telling you. The place was locked up with massive amounts of security, and at the time, you needed clearance just to get anywhere near this place. When they were developing the area for the site, they had to come up with a quick solution for the trees that had to be cut down. Loggers, of course, could not get any security clearance to get near the site, and so the people involved there took thousands of dead trees, piled them up, and just burned them. There are still a few witnesses here and there who are still alive today that live in the city that saw a big giant yellow glow because the bonfire was so big, the glow reflected off the clouds, and people miles away could see it as clear as day. It was a secret atomic facility burning as bright as the sun. People thought it was the end of the world. People back then spread rumors about the place being used to look at UFOs and other alien craft. The Air Force apparently never really cared about these rumors. This is because they were so far off from the truth that it actually helped them keep the secret from the public. Anyways, I had known about this, and I heard stories for some time. But it wasn't until a few weeks back that I grew especially bored and was looking for something to do. I always had a love for the outdoors, and I have done quite a bit of exploring and hiking in my own time. I decided to do some more investigating, and then to go. So of course, I looked up the place online. I looked at articles, documents, and all that kind of stuff. I talked to my parents about the place, what they remember, all the local rumors and such. I even talked to older people around the neighborhood that I knew. I got excited, like really excited. I hadn't been on a hike or explored anywhere in a few months, so I knew just how much I was going to enjoy this. I explained the entire story about the area and the facility to my friend Mark, who was also a hiker and joined me on many treks before, but he wasn't convinced about the potential for exploring. He said it's most likely all just sealed off, and that we'll get there, walk a little ways in, and then have nothing to do. He said he didn't want to waste that entire day. I'm practically begging him to just give in and say yes. I'll promise him everything under the sun if the place turns out to be boring. He eventually says yes, and I thought, sweet, let's do this. None of us had a car, and both of our parents were busy, so we were going to do this old school. We really enjoyed walking, and the exercise was nice. 3 hours. I only realized about halfway through how bad of an idea it was. But by that point, there was no turning back. We're both puffing and out of breath. We decided to make the most of the daylight that we had and made our way in. The place is completely open to the public now. It's not restricted land at all. I did see a sign about the abandoned facility itself, but I'll get into that. Radiation was reported to be above normal background levels, but that was back in 1997, so it should be fine by now. It would be incredibly stupid for them to open the place to the public if it wasn't safe, so I really wasn't worried about that. Mark has a slight interest in photography, and is kind of weird about it. He prefers taking photos in a retro style on some really old cameras from the early 2000s. He did bring some PowerShot camera thing from 2002. I guess that qualifies as retro now. We got a good ways in and took in our surroundings. The place was actually pretty pleasant. A lot of animal activity, but there was something that was strange. There were no birds singing or any kind of bird activity. It was all very weird, considering the place is a wildlife reserve. We were starting to lose quite a bit of light by this point. It wasn't pitch black, but the sun wasn't bright. I did spot some kind of glint in the distance. It wasn't a normal deer. It was completely white. I'm not talking about some faded fur or a couple of splotches. Every inch on this thing was pure white. This wasn't the only strange thing about it. It had a third antler instead of 2. It did look really weird, and it was kind of coming out of the back of the deer's head, instead of from the top like the other 2. My friend did try taking a picture, but the stupid sound his camera made startled it, but we decided whatever, it's just a deer, and we wanted to continue exploring. Once we made our way a fair way down the trail path, the old abandoned buildings started to become visible. We also kept seeing dead trees as we moved further into the forest, clusters of them. All the trees around in the rest of the forest were perfectly healthy, but every so often there was just a group of 3 or 4 trees that were stone dead. We got up to the entrance. It looked like all the entrances to the place had been concreted off. At this point, I was thinking that if we came all the way and just couldn't get in, I swear, I was looking desperately around the place for some way to get in. Literally any way at all. Mark was pissed. I was pissed. I decided that we would just explore some other trail, and hoping that we would find some sort of way in. We made our way quite far down this trail, quite a distance away from the abandoned facility buildings. But then we stopped in our tracks. I said out loud to Mark, "Alright, that's really weird." He just kind of ignored me and went to inspect it. There was a giant concrete retaining wall, just standing there almost in the middle of nowhere in the forest. But it also had a large hole in the middle of it. It looked like somebody had blasted it with an RPG, or used some sort of explosives on it. Mark instantly started climbing through the hole, which I sprinted towards him to pull him back. I started yelling at him, calling him an idiot because we shouldn't be screwing around with stuff like this. I got to the hole, but he was already in it. There was a tunnel entrance right there. Mark was already completely out of sight, and I rushed in to try and catch up with him. The tunnel was crude, and there was dirt everywhere. The smell was absolutely foul. It smelled like a combination of bleach and vomit. The tunnel went on for a while, and it opened up into some other retaining wall. It took me what seemed like forever to get through the whole system, but I hadn't caught sight of Mark once since he rushed in. Finally, I saw what I thought was the exit. Do bear in mind that I had to crawl through these tunnels as there weren't enough headroom for me to stand up. My knees were on fire, and I was just relieved to be able to rest them. As I came out the tunnel, I bumped straight into Mark, who was sitting motionless on a metallic staircase. I almost crashed into him. I started to talk, but Mark immediately jumped towards me and covered my mouth. I was thinking, yo, what the hell, dude? You just disappeared on me and now this? Mark just pointed his finger. I started to look around the room where his finger was pointing. We were in some kind of concrete room way underground. I wasn't sure exactly how far we were, but it had to be at least 20 feet deep or so, maybe even more. And the walls, holy crap, the walls were just absolutely lined with bugs. I'm not talking a few flies here and there. I mean piles and piles and piles of bugs all bunched up together. A pile of spiders were all huddled together. A pile of abnormally large cockroaches stacked on top of one another, all stretching across the wall. Just loads and loads of bugs. None of the bugs were doing anything except for what looked to be vibrating. They were kind of moving side to side in a bunch, but only ever so slightly. The air in the room was pungent, like someone had died and had been left there for hundreds of years. I chalked up the smell to the masses of bugs. There were piles of them rising on the ground below the stairwell, leaving almost no room to move at all. Mark was absolutely terrified of bugs, so it's no wonder he was frozen in place. He was shaking as if we were somewhere up north. I couldn't get a single word out of him, but he somehow managed to stabilize himself, and I'll run straight back to the surface. He finally began to speak. Dude, what the fuck is going on here? I had no idea what to even reply to him. As I was looking for the words, he said again, dude, what the fuck? There's something glowing over there. And no kidding. Near the floor in one of the corners was another pile of cockroaches, but they weren't the color they should be. They were slightly tinted. They were a different shade, almost a yellow color, and they also weren't the only ones. There were a few other masses of bugs that were slightly tinted with different colors, a slight yellow, a slight orange. The number of bugs must have been in the thousands. There was no sound coming from them whatsoever. I was in the process of stepping back and telling Mark that we just need to get the fuck out of there before we make too much noise and started to get swarmed by these bugs. Mark waved me away and hushed me before I could say anything. He told me that he thought he had found a way into the nuclear research lab. It was really hard to make out because of all the bugs, but there was a very small door, something like a closet door that a maintenance worker would use. Mark was shaking like hell and had a trembling lip, but he told me that we needed to check it out. I asked him if he was absolutely sure, and he told me to just go and not think about it. Now, this next part is a little bit embarrassing, but it was most likely the only way it was ever gonna work. Bugs are definitely not my favorite thing in the world, but I can handle touching them or them touching me. I walked ahead of Mark. As he kept his eyes closed, I held his hand and sort of guided him through. I was walking as slowly and carefully as I possibly could. I didn't want to step on any of the bugs and either make them mad or hear that disgusting sound. Sure, they couldn't exactly do anything to us, but the prospect of mountains of bugs heading straight for us would most likely make Mark kill me. I was able to tiptoe between the mounds of bugs and finally got to the door. Thankfully, it was unlocked, and I opened it, shoving Mark inside first. He told me he wasn't ready to open his eyes yet, and stood by the door catching his breath. The maintenance closet door was actually a small corridor that led to a manhole cover at the end. Both the cover and the walls were littered with graffiti. The graffiti basically told people to keep out if they didn't want to die. One of them that caught my attention was, "Entrance to Hell." Another message said, "Abominations." Whatever the hell that meant. Mark had calmed down as much as he ever would, so I lifted up the grate, and we went down. Underneath, it was surprisingly boring. Tons more graffiti telling people to go back, but that was about it. It was just a straight line tunnel, but the door at the end was something major. It was exactly like that, and it made us feel like ants. We walked up to it and saw a panel with some buttons on the side. We thought they wouldn't work because this place definitely shouldn't have power after decades. Surprisingly, when we played with the buttons, the doors began to open. It made this loud screeching sound as the door slid away into the tunnel. As soon as the door finished opening, a steady stream of water started pouring through the entrance and into the tunnel. It looked like the facility had been partially flooded, but not enough to cause any major issues for us aside from having soaking wet clothes. Finally, we headed into the place. Both Mark and I were incredibly excited. This was finally the place we had been looking for. All of my research had actually paid off. Water was still sliding out, which we had to go through, but we started exploring the halls of the place. We kind of split up and went into different rooms across the hall from each other. I could hear Mark stomping around and shuffling papers. I figured he was really getting into some secret documents. The place, however, was actually quite disappointing. It seemed like they had gutted it when it got abandoned. Most of the windows were sealed up, and any doors leading further into the facility were completely sealed off. This meant that we had maybe half of the actual facility to explore, less if there were any floors beneath the one that we were in. I came across a few boxes of flies stacked up in the corner. Most were water damaged beyond repair. It looked like they either couldn't get everything out in time, or simply didn't care enough. I picked up a few documents and skimmed through them, but they weren't very interesting, mostly because I couldn't understand them. There was a lot of talk about a reactor, radiation levels, and something about a bomber using nuclear power for fuel. I started to hear more stomping. This time it was aggressive. I could feel the vibrations on my feet. I wondered what the hell Mark was doing. That's when I heard him scream. The instant that I heard the scream, I dropped the documents and ran out the room. As I ran, I collided with Mark, and we both fell to the ground. I didn't even have time to ask him what was wrong. He yelled at me to move out the way. Without looking back, he ran straight down the tunnel that we came from. I got up and started chasing after him. As I did, I heard more noises from behind me. Stomping noises. When I turned around, I couldn't believe my eyes. There, on the wall of the corridor, was an absolutely massive spider. Its size was beyond anything that I could describe, maybe larger than any dog that I had ever seen. It was brown with a dark yellowish color. I was paralyzed. I thought if I moved it would charge at me. For what felt like hours, I stood there watching it, contort its long limbs as it slowly slithered along the wall, out of sight. It didn't even crawl like a normal spider. It dragged itself along the wall with two of its legs, leaving a trail of slime behind. Every time one of its front legs moved, it hit the wall, sending vibrations through the entire structure. Needless to say, I ran out of there. I only caught up to Mark once I reached the surface. Somehow, the adrenaline helped him ignore his fear, and we both walked the majority of the way home in silence. A few days later, after everything had calmed down, I asked Mark what happened. He told me that while exploring, he kept feeling vibrations through his legs. Thinking it was me running or jumping around, he peeked his head around the corner. That's when he saw it, the massive spider. He described how it came out, pincers first, stretching inches away from its face. Mark said he screamed as soon as he saw it. The instant that he screamed, the thing started to move, but dragging itself faster than before. He fumbled with his camera and was able to snap a blind picture of one of its limbs before his instincts took over and he ran out of there. To this day, we're still haunted by what we stumble upon in that facility. So anyways, stay away from Dawson Forest. Stay away from any abandoned facilities. Do you know someone who's been involved with bad medicine on the REZ? I'm not just referring to things found around you, about curses and words being spoken out, the things about somebody falling and breaking their leg. No, I'm talking about real bad medicine, like about my friend who lost 3 family members within 3 weeks, 2 cousins and 1 uncle. As soon as he told me this, I knew it had to do with bad medicine, with witchcraft. I remember my grandmother always said that death always comes in 3s. She said we start to die the day that we're born, and that some things can only be found through a ceremony. I grew up very traditional, going to all the ceremonies as a kid, going to the sweat lodge 4 times, and following all the rules of the REZ that you've spoken on here about before. So when my friend told me this, I mentioned that maybe his family should come talk to my uncle, because it sounds like something is going on, some dark stuff, bad medicine type of things. He told me that it's what him and his mom were thinking, but that his dad didn't believe in that type of stuff. How sad. Anyways, a few weeks passed and he called me and told me that his sister's husband had passed away now as well. He said that his sister went into the kitchen late at night to get a drink of water. As she was getting water and she looked out the window, she saw some sort of bear with a humanoid face. She froze for a while and then screamed. She said her husband came running into the kitchen and also saw this thing, and he ran out the kitchen door and ran after it. This thing ran straight towards the mountain, straight up the face of a cliff. She said her husband couldn't believe it. It was impossible for any man to go up a cliff that way. 3 days later, her husband went missing. She said they heard noises outside their home, and he again went to go look around, and he didn't come back inside. His body was discovered later that day. The findings of the medical examiner deemed that someone had killed him. He died from trauma to the head, and they haven't found who killed him. So again, I told him that it sounds like something dark is going on, and that they should reach out to my uncle who practices medicine. My friend then mentioned that's actually why he's reaching out to me. He said that his dad finally bit into the traditional dogma and wanted to speak to him. These are his words, not mine. He told him everything that's been happening and the family members who've been dying. Basically, they did conduct a ceremony. I'm not sure what happened in the ceremony, but they didn't tell me. But my friend did share with me that my uncle said that someone in their family was starting to get involved in dark practices, and that's why these things were happening to them. Not only this, but someone had nailed the bladder of a goat to a tree that was struck by lightning. Inside of it were things that were linked to him and his family. And then my uncle said, once it falls, someone else in the family is gonna die. As for everything else that was happening, it was because of the state of the bladder. The more it decayed, the more terrible things were gonna happen. So my uncle gave them some kind of protection item to keep them safe in the meantime, and that in a few days, they would go out to find the tree. The next day they all went out, and as my uncle said, they did end up finding the tree. The tree itself was dead, fried by thunder. My uncle then approached the tree. Nailed to its burnt bark was a bladder of a goat, clustering brown dry blood and swarming with bugs. My friend said that his dad was about to touch it, and that's when my uncle shouted and said to not ever touch anything like this. My uncle then approached it, did some things with the mai-coh feather, and then started praying. He then got it with a cloth and the nails popped out. The nails themselves didn't even look like normal nails, like the ones you buy from a store. After he got the bladder, he opened it, and inside, he finds bundles of hair, fragments of bones, even what looked to be a fang of a snake, and a picture of my friend's family. My uncle then said that whoever did this, it was out of jealousy. But not only this, it will now come back twofold, and that they're gonna find out who it was pretty soon. I know it's difficult, but pray for them. Forgiveness is better, because only Creator can give or take it. You shouldn't be saying someone's name after they have passed away, just like you should get rid of their belongings and burn their clothes when they pass. You don't want to disturb them or confuse them by saying their name. They're actually starting their new journey. These are teachings that my grandma gave me. Like, did you know that their spirit sticks around for 4 days? They go visit the places that meant something to them. That's another reason you need to cover your mirrors as well, especially in those 4 days. It actually makes me just want to get rid of mirrors overall, to be honest. Don't wash your own clothes and such until after the 4 days have passed. I even told some friends in the past about the burning of clothes, and they told me that they didn't know. But they actually weren't familiar at all about the whole getting rid of stuff, especially the burning of clothes. Another thing my grandma said was to not cry because it will cause the spirits to stick around, to actually try to be near you and longer. She even told me a story of a mom and daughter where the daughter keeps crying after her mother's death. One night, the mom comes to her and tells her she needs to keep her head up, and something about stop crying because she can't pass on to the spirit world. You see, it's an adjustment for them. After they return to our ancestors, it can be a very busy time in the world. For now, give that family member some time to fully adjust to the other side. So now back to the burning of clothes, personal belongings of those who are no longer with us, especially items that were close to them, such as clothes or possessions. They all need to be burned or destroyed. My grandma said it helps release the spirit from attachments to the physical world, and to also stop any lingering energy that can affect us. It's been a while since my grandma passed on. My parents aren't very traditional, and I'm really trying to go back and learn as much as I can. Has anybody else heard of similar things to do when a relative passes? I don't care if you believe me. This whole thing is gonna sound completely unreal, almost like a fever dream. Nobody believes me, but someone might know just what the hell happened here. So I had turned 19, and I decided to go visit my grandfather in North Michigan. A bit of backstory about my grandfather. He lives in a cabin. I never really knew him too well. I only saw him a few times. All I already know about him is that back in the 70s, he was in Vietnam. When I was 17, he confessed to me that he felt terrible about the things that he had to do over there. He was told to beat somebody with a shovel until he died. After that, I kinda just would avoid him. I was too freaked out to talk to him. I guess the old guilt caught up with him and kinda affected his mind. But now, he knew that he was nearing the end of his life. He was having some health issues and refused medication. He did invite me over since I'm his last living relative, and he wanted to spend some time with me before he passed. At first I didn't want to, but I decided that this is what my father would have wanted. After about 3 hours of driving, I get to his cabin. It's a nice area. It looked almost like it was made out of Lincoln logs or something. He's waiting outside, smoking a pipe, and rocking in some chair, suspenders and all, like somebody you'll see who's a stereotypical of an old farmer guy. But he looks exhausted. I can see dark circles under his saggy eyes. He gets up and gives me a big bear hug. He's trying to hug me as hard as he can, but he can barely walk, and I can see that he's very weak. We hug for a few minutes, mostly because I find it too awkward to break away. I remind myself that even though I only remember him for a few years, he's known me most of my life. Halfway through, he starts kind of breathing heavy on me. He sniffles. I realize that he's been crying silently. He breaks away and says, "Come inside, son." I go inside to a very cozy cabin. It's getting cold, especially in Michigan, so he has the fire going. He has running water, a gas stove, and 2 beds. One of them is very new. I think he bought it just for me. After a few minutes, I begin to care for him. I kind of begin to remember my grandfather, if that makes sense. The bond of family becomes newly important. That's when I decide to be his living helper until he dies. That very day, he starts to make some decaf, but halfway through, he starts to sweat. I help him sit down by the fire and finish the coffee. My coffee tastes terrible, but he's still very appreciative. He assures me it's delicious. After the decaf, we get ready for bed. He lies on the small bed and tells me to sleep on the new one. When I tell him that we should switch, he refuses. I guess he did buy it for me. He then said his prayers and goes to sleep. I can't stand it, watching this old dying man, my own flesh and blood, sleeping on that pile of junk. He's quite small and frail, even though he's not thin. So with a bit of effort, I was able to lift him up gently and tuck him into the big bed. I move the small bed to the window, and I make sure to sleep facing it. That way the sun wakes me up. When the sun does wake me up, it's like 6 a.m. I slide the bed back and switch my grandpa back. I then lay on the good bed for another 20 minutes before I realize that I can't fall asleep again. All that lifting woke me up, so I decided to make some breakfast. and I end up packing his pipe as well. I go to the outhouse near the cabin because the flushing might wake him up. When I'm done, I step outside and then notice something behind this cabin. It seems like a gate holding 6 black horses. They're shackled in these massive metal chains. Each horse has a huge metal ring around their necks. They're all chained together to the ground. Since it is 6 a.m. and the forest is dark, they actually look really creepy, like something straight out of hell. I thought that maybe it was a trick of the light, but their faces looked all kinds of screwed up. Their eyes looked almost red. I thought it might just be a reflection, almost like how cameras show some red pupils. I stepped back inside to find my grandpa awake, sitting on his bed. I talked about what we were going to do for the day. He said his back felt good enough today that he might want to do some fishing. Not to stroke my own ego, but I do attribute that to me, letting him sleep on the good bed. After a breakfast of eggs and bacon, I drive him to a pond near the house. We fish for a while, just silent the entire time. It wasn't awkward though, it was a comfortable silence. I didn't catch anything, but he caught a 3-pounder. I had to help him reel it in. He was very proud of himself, and it actually made me happy. He said that he used to love to go out fishing. I told him that we would make it into dinner. On the drive back, I asked him about the horses. I had kind of forgotten about them since the early morning. Instantly, I knew I shouldn't have brought this up. His smile was replaced with a kind of stern grin. He told me not to worry about it, and that they were just some sort of pets. I almost listened to him, except he nervously quivered when he said, "Worry never happened before, or after." So I doubt that it was just an old man thing. He showed me how to gut and debone the fish. We marinated and dry rubbed for about 30 minutes, while he was out there puffing on his pipe. When he was doing this, I opened the curtains to the back window and peered at the horses. They hadn't moved at all. They hadn't even ate or slept. They didn't look cold, but they were still shooting hot breath from their nose. I know because it was cold. I saw it. I then stepped outside to talk to my grandpa about the horses. "Did you not feed the horses or something?" He then says, "You don't feed those horses, son. Not this type." I had no clue what he meant by that. Every time that I inquired, he would just ignore me or change the subject. When he was done, we stepped inside and had our dinner. I then noticed that he prayed extra long that night. The next morning, I just woke up with the sun, and I put my grandpa back into his bed. I decided to get a bit closer to the horses this time. I got just barely close enough so I could see them. I don't even think they noticed me. Remembering it now, it sent shivers down my spine. It was terrifying. They had shaggy, matted fur, deformed and bent out of shaped skulls. I know for sure that their rib cages should have not been indented like that. Their teeth looked like they had been chewing on rocks or something. It wasn't just their appearance. I've been around deformed animals before. It doesn't really bother me so much. But these things had a really screwed up presence. Like the feeling in your stomach after you watch some really screwed up things on the internet. Or like you see someone die. Initially, I felt bad for them, but now I didn't even want to see them. Strange enough, I also wanted to get closer, but I couldn't do it. One of them looked at me in the eyes, and if I hadn't just used the bathroom, I most likely would have pissed myself. I ran back into the cabin to hide. Grandpa was just starting to wake up, so I tried forgetting about it and got to work. Today was a supply day, meaning that we were going to go into town to refill on food and other small things. I decided to buy Grandpa a cake as well. Not for any special reason, just that it's nice to have some fun while he could. He always gets someone to deliver food for him, but it was good to get some exercise. Plus, his back was feeling better. We rode into town, and that's when Grandpa said that he was getting sick. The poor guy hadn't been in a car for years. Maybe motion sickness got to him, but we had to pull over. After that, I realized that we had to go quick. We picked everything up and I hid the cake from Grandpa to surprise him with it at the cabin. When we got back, something was wrong. There's a racket coming from the back of the cabin. I then pulled the car up and stepped outside. The horses are going nuts. Later on the floor behind them are some kind of white balls. Grandpa then tells me very sternly to get in the fucking cabin. Shouldn't we drive away? And he said, son, the worst thing we can do right now is try to escape. I have no clue what the hell he's on about. When we get inside, he starts explaining. Now, remember, he's an old man, and he's also injured, so I can barely understand him. He starts talking about how he didn't know that they were there when he bought the cabin, but if he leaves, he's gonna die. They must have ate something, from what I can piece together through everything that he's told me. If you feed them, they get stronger, and they can draw things in better. He said the most that we can do is hope that they run out of things to eat. Then, there was a snap, a loud crack like a whipping snapping through the air. Grandpa goes silent. I then say, what the hell was that? He stares at me kinda empty like, well, looking back at it, he was accepting his death. He then says, one of them broke the chains. I then said, what the hell are you talking about? He then looks at me and says, behind you. I whip around, facing the building. Son, you're a good kid. And then I lose consciousness, and I wake up with the sun beaming on my face. I wake up in a pile of my own blood. There's a crowbar at my side. My headache is terrible. I touch the back of my head. It's just a flesh wound. I pick myself up and try not to vomit. I sit down and try to come to. Everything hurts. I'm freezing. Then I think, wait, why am I freezing? The right wall of the cabin is full of holes. It almost looks like someone threw boulders through the wall. I then think, where's Grandpa? There's no sign of him. I open the door and step outside. I check behind, and the gates have been trampled. The chains are broken. I get closer. Those white things that were all crushed up were just rabbits. The horses would have chewed them and then spit them out. I start to piece everything together, and I throw up a few times. Long story short, I walked back to the cabin and picked up a few things. I picked up my grandpa's pipe and his bluegrass tobacco. I found the golden cross that he kept in his cabinet. I drove home without stopping. The next day, I called up a delivery boy, and I asked him to deliver to the house so I could see if I dreamed the whole thing. After a while, he calls me and is asking what house I was talking about. He said that there used to be a house there, but it's been burned down for years. Guys, I have no idea what the hell happened that day. I'm sitting here smoking his pipe. Honestly, it's the only proof that any of this ever happened. My therapist can't explain it, since I literally have his pipe as physical evidence. My priest can't explain it since there's no record of demonic horses, or anything as far as we know. My friends just tell me that I'm full of shit. I'm not even sure what else to do. What the hell happened back there? I live in Pennsylvania and I spend time hiking up in the Poconos. My friend who I used to go hiking with went down to Appalachian State University. He's always telling me how I should come down for some inner woods fun. So in the summer of 2006, I drive down from Pennsylvania to North Carolina to spend the week backpacking. He introduces me to his friends and we get stupid drunk the first night, having a great time and all. The next day we start getting stuff together to go on a hike. So we should have started around 8 a.m., but we ended up not getting out until 1 p.m., simply because of all of us being hungover. We plan to stay out there for 4 nights. We split up the gear evenly among us, and one of the guy's girlfriends drives us out there to the start of the trail. The trail ends up being a little more than a game path. We all tell her that we'll call her to pick us up from a diner that's on the other side of the park from a payphone. Now, I was in decent shape. I have never smoked a day in my life, and I had a decent amount of hiking under my belt. Even though we weren't that high, I'm still huffing and puffing like a chain smoker. They ended up going at a steady pace, and I was struggling to keep on. They keep asking if I'm alright, and I just tell them that I'm getting used to the elevation change. I struggle to keep up in the late afternoon, and it's almost getting to dusk. Never have I pushed myself so hard as I am right now. My heart beats in my ears. My vision is getting blurry, and they all keep stopping for me to catch up. The rest of the group is trying to push for a campsite, and it happens to be me that's slowing them down. I end up dragging further and further behind the group every time they look back, telling them it's okay for them to keep going. My friend comes back and tells me that the group is going to go ahead of us and get a campsite going, and he's going to stay back with me. I tell him to go on. I should be alright. He tells me it's not that big of a deal, and that they understand the elevation differences and stuff. At this point, I never felt worse in my whole life. I couldn't even catch my breath. I had a pounding headache. I couldn't even see right. I couldn't go on even if I wanted to. He tells me to sit down and take a rest. We'll catch up to them at whatever campsite they pick. They all said that we should be able to see the campsite from the trail. So I sit down, trying to catch my breath. I close my eyes for what feels like a moment. When I open them, it's pitch black out. I call out for my friend, but there's no answer. I still feel terrible, but just a little bit better than before. I fumble out the headlamp. The high, medium, and low modes don't work. Only moonlight mode works. It does this when the battery is low. I strap it on. It's bright enough to follow the trail anyways, which is a good thing. I glance at my watch. It's 1 a.m. I've been out here for a long time. I call out for my friend again, but there's no answer. I'm starting to get a little freaked out, but I figure that he went to the camp. It shouldn't be that far off. I start off at a slow pace, keeping my breathing in check. I'm watching my footing. I hike the trail for about an hour. There's no sign of my friends. I started to wonder if I'm even on the trail at all. I'm thinking that I should do some backtracking, but I decide against it. I go on for a bit. There's still no signs of my group, and I'm getting less and less sure of being on the trail. I look back at my watch. It still says 1 a.m. That's when I realize it's broken, and I notice that the day is off. It says Monday, and we started off on Friday. I start panicking, and I just yell my friend's name as loud as I can. There's no answer. I decided to go against my judgment and backtrack to where I started from. Somehow, I ended up on a path up on a ridge. Never in my life have I seen so few signs of humanity. I can only really see what I think is a city way off in the distance. I started thinking about just heading down the ridge towards the city. I start heading down the mountain towards the slope, towards the light. However, as I get just a little ways down, the light disappears behind the tree line. At this point, I'm panicking about being lost. I'm pushing myself too much at the elevation that I was not adjusted to. Halfway down the slope, I hear something from the top of the ridge. I say something because I'm not sure what I heard, but I did hear something. It sounded almost like a log being dropped. I can't see the trails I was on, but I thought it was most likely my friends. I start yelling at the top of my lungs. That's when I hear somebody yell back. But at that time, it didn't occur to me that that yell didn't sound like anyone from my group. I was just happy that I got found. I then start saying, "Guys, I'm coming back up. Don't move." I start trying to get back up the ridge. I'm struggling, pushing myself hard again. I'm about half the distance to the top of the ridge when I stop, and I try to see my friend's flashlight. My headlamp is on moonlight mode, so I can't really see anything. I then see what I think is a figure coming towards me. I think it's my friend, and I think I was getting really scared. I stop as I look, and this figure was not human. It was too big and not the right shape. It looked too slender in some parts. Now, my headlamp does this thing where if the battery is low, it will only shine moonlight mode. But if I switch it over to turbo, it will light up for about half a second before kicking back down to moonlight mode. I reach up and switch my light to turbo to light up the figure. The bright flash was enough to light up this thing in front of me, about 30 feet up the slope. What I remember most was that it had a face that almost looked like a possum, but it was bigger than a human head. I screamed out the worst scream I had in me, and I turned around and started running down the slope. I only got 5 steps in before I tripped and rolled down the slope. Things get really hazy at this point. I remember coming to a stop in a sharp pain coming from my head down to my neck. It felt like I was being stabbed. I was laying on my belly, trying to move down the rest of the slope. Every time that I tried to look back, the pain in my neck would almost make me pass out. I do remember, though, hearing something coming up on me as I crawled. I was moving so slow that anything that wanted me could definitely catch up pretty quick. My head was spinning. The pain was unbearable in my neck. And I was struggling to catch my breath. I felt like the thing was right on top of me. At this point, my body stopped listening to me, and I couldn't move anymore. I think I passed out there for a while. It's hard to tell. I slowly pushed myself over my back. I still only have moonlight mode on. I can't really see. I try to reach out to my headlamp to try the turbo mode again, but before my arm gets to it, the shooting pain in my neck brings my arm back down. I lay on my back for a while, trying to see or hear anything up on the slope, but I hear nothing. I slowly start to get up. Every time that I flex my neck, it gets a crippling pain in my body. I start shuffling down the rest of the slope, going from tree to tree and leaning against them. I'm in pure panic at this point, even crying, just straight up sobbing. I'm trying to rack my brain on what to do. I keep trying to head straight to where I think I saw the lights, the town where the college is in. After a while, my sobbing slowly stops, and I start to be able to think normally. I'm trying to figure out how bad my neck is hurt and how far I have to go. I'm resting on a tree. I close my eyes for a second, and then suddenly, I feel something on my back. I turn around, and I swing my arms the best that I can. I get blinded by light. I'm still swinging and kicking with this light blowing in my eyes. I end up on the ground, my arms being held on my side. Pain is in my neck. It's making me sick, but I keep trying to struggle. My eyes start to adjust, and it turns out that it's my friend and one of the hiking buddies. They're talking about something, but I can't hear them. I nod my head, and they let go. I keep saying that I can't hear them. They look at me like I'm missing a face or something. The other guy takes some water out of his bag and gives it to me. I drink it, trying to tell them everything that happened. I keep saying that my neck is hurt. They help me up and we start walking. They keep saying something to me. I can just barely now make out what they're saying. Slowly, we get back to the campsite. My hearing is coming back a little bit. I sit down on a log to rest. I then ask my friend, "Why did you end up leaving me?" He then says that he didn't. He says he couldn't wake me up, and then he ran to the campsite to get help. But when he came back, I was just gone. I tell them what happened. Both of them then look at me like I'm crazy. I ask where the others are at. They tell me that they're also looking for me. I started to feel silly about telling them what I saw. I'm starting to think it was just my head playing tricks on me. My neck starts to feel a little bit better. I start asking about what time the others will be back. They said they would return around midnight. I tell them that I'm going to sleep for a bit. I fall asleep pretty quickly by laying down by the fire. My friend then wakes me up looking scared as hell. The other guys came back, and they were packing everything up. My friend then says, "We gotta go, right now." Like, right fucking now. I heard the guys that were looking for me talking about how they were being followed in the woods, and they also kept seeing something. I wake up and I ask him, "Did it look like a possum?" The guys just stare at me and then he goes, "We gotta get the fuck out of here right now." We hike it the way we came. Once again, I'm slower than the group. Only this time, my friend actually stays with me. The rest of the group goes out of sight. He then says, "Don't worry, man. I'm not leaving you." I keep stopping to catch my breath and rest my neck. My friend's staying with me. He doesn't even rush me. He then says, "Don't worry, man. I've been out in these woods at night so many times. I can get us back." We keep moving at a slow pace. My friend keeps saying stuff like, "You guys just got spooked. There's a lot of things out here in the woods that go bump in the night." I'm resting with my back against a tree. My friend's just looking around and waiting for me. I then look at him, and he looks behind me. His face is frozen. He then says, "We have to move a little faster." At this point, he turns and gets my backpack strap and starts pulling me along. I don't question it. I just push as hard as I can. After running for what seems like forever, we finally get to the road, and we see the group huddle around a payphone. They called one of the guy's girlfriends for a ride. She shows up and takes me right to the hospital. I keep trying to tell her the story of what happened. We all do. but she doesn't buy it. To this day, we still talk about what happened, but none of us go around that area no more. I don't even go into any woods at night anymore. The weird thing is that my friend, he still keeps going back there. I think that's pretty weird. You should never have parties with strangers on the REZ. Not just strangers, but with people you just truly don't know. Nowadays, I don't let coworkers or people I don't really know into my house. I know better, and this is all because of something that happened in my past, what I gone through. These experiences have made me into who I am now. I came upon a story on here about the devil. I'm sure that you, as many others on the REZ, have heard the stories about him. Some see him as a man in a trench coat and hat. Others see him as a good-looking person that women fall head over heels for. Someone who buys the whole bar a drink. Other people describe him as a stranger who gives them anything they need or anything they want. You know, all the very cliche type of stuff. Not to discredit anybody or their experience, but I have a story myself about an encounter with him, or whatever this thing was. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was something else. I can't really confirm it, but I do think it was somewhat pure evil because of what happened after that encounter. The reason I say this is because I used to live a crazy life. Drugs, alcohol, all those things make you open to these forces out there, the ones that we can't always see. I have had ceremonies done in the past so that I could leave, but I also had to change my lifestyle. You can't expect for these things to just disappear through a ceremony. The ceremony is done to cleanse and heal and figure stuff out, but at the end of it, you also have to play your part, and that's the main goal for all of us who are struggling, right? Fighting every day. At least that's what I try to do every day of my life. It's not easy, and some days are difficult. I have learned to just take everything one day at a time, leaning on the Creator every single day as I walk the red road. Well, anyways, I changed my life. I quit drinking and doing drugs as well, but I still had to work, and I was a bartender. I know, you might be calling me a hypocrite, but it's complicated and weird, and I don't want to make this story too long, but God is not done with me yet. All this change doesn't happen overnight, and trust me, change is still happening, and I didn't stay working there at the bar for too long. One night, it was just me bartending, and there were a few customers sitting around, drinking and eating, including my friend Robbie. Robbie was always there at the bar. That's what it seemed like, especially when I was bartending. I think he just wanted to get some free drinks the best that he could. The bar was kinda lonely, not like some other days. There was this random guy who walked in and sat at the bar. The crazy thing about it was that it seemed like the lights dimmed, and the jukebox started playing really fast. Actually, a different song started playing, but you get the point. I just had an ugly feeling from him. So he ordered a drink. He looked at me with this weird look. I'm not sure. It just felt strange. Anyways, he grabbed this drink and went to go sit down at a table. I kept my eye on him because, you know, as a bartender, you should always be mindful of your surroundings. I kept looking his way every now and then. He just seemed weird. He was dressed normal, just a normal looking dude. He was just sitting there, drinking. And I swear at some point he had his head down, and it seemed like he started praying. At least that's what it seemed like. After a few minutes he started pulling out a deck of cards, and he was just shuffling away. Some of the guys around there got closer to him when they saw he had a deck of cards, and that he was by himself. Even Robbie went over there at some point. Maybe because I wasn't giving him my whole attention, he started doing card tricks and then began telling people their future. How do I know this? Because, as time went on, Robbie came up to the bar to get more drinks, and he said to put it on the man's tab. Robbie told me that this guy that walked in, he's telling everyone their future. He knows stuff that's happened in the past that nobody would know. I looked at Robbie as he was telling me this, and I told him to be careful. People who mess with stuff like that, they're using powers that we don't understand. It's about what's behind them. You never know what kind of spirits or forces they're communicating with, and we should leave those things alone. In our culture, We have a deep respect for the spiritual side of things, and we're always reminded that not everything is meant to be digged into. These are all teachings from the elders that talk about the dangers of using bad medicine or manipulating things for personal gain. I remember one of the things I was told at a past ceremony was to never accept any kind of gift from a stranger, words, or a physical gift, even any sort of blessing. I mean, even outside the REZ, everyone knows this, especially when they seem too good to be true. Any gift, any favor, they're not always free. Robbie told me that I was looking into it too much, and that I was overthinking it, and he kept saying it was just some drunk guy doing tricks and telling stories to pass time, and that I was overthinking it. A small group eventually got around him, and Robbie kept coming up, and he told me that he kept asking about me, and that he also wanted to see my future as well. I declined, because, based off of everything that I just said. The man stayed for a while. After a few hours, yes, it was a few hours, the man stood up, gathered his cards, and he came up to the bar for the tab. He then walked out as quietly just like he came in. Robbie came to say goodbye as it was closing hour, and then we all went about our own business. Days, weeks, months went by. I found me a different job, and me and Robbie kind of stopped talking, I guess because I no longer worked at the bar. Again, this town on the REZ is not big. Everyone knows everyone. I say this because within the next 2 years, and maybe I'm overlooking it, but to this day, I will forever be grateful that I denied that request at the bar, because every single person whose future he read is gone. Not days after, not weeks, not months, but about 2 years later, one after another, all within a short time frame. They all died. Some of them were really good people. I got to know them, including my friend Robbie, who died in a car crash head on. I know it sounds like a crazy messed up story, especially because who else was there? To everyone else, it seemed just like random deaths that occurred. But I know everyone who died within those few months were the same people talking with that man at the bar. He didn't have a trench coat. I didn't see a tail or deer feet or anything. I know it was him. I do wonder when someone randomly passes away on the REZ, if there was something going on behind closed doors that we don't know about. It's not a coincidence that every single person surrounding that man at the bar passed away in 1 year. What do you all think? Have you ever came across something like this? Or a person who offers somebody something, and then sometime later, that person ends up passing away? I worked for a funeral home about 25 years ago or so. The mortician was a good friend of mine, and he offered me a job. This is a true story, by the way, even though some of the names have been changed. One day, I wasn't feeling very well, so I told my wife I was going to go to the clinic to get checked out. As I was on my way, the police, ambulance, and fire trucks were heading out of town, lights on and all the sirens blasting. I didn't really pay that much attention. As I pulled into the parking lot, my cell phone rang. It was the big one, the kind that looked like a house phone but was plugged into a cigarette lighter. I answered the call. It was my mom. "Mom, I just got to the clinic and I'm not feeling too well. Can I just call you later?" I said. She then replied, "As soon as you're done, come to the house." Then she hung up. So I checked in and began to wait in the dreaded waiting room. As I was waiting for my name to be called, I was thinking about the 60-mile round trip to my mom's house. I really didn't want to go because of how I felt. But finally, I heard my name called after what seemed like forever. The doctor gave me some meds and sent me on my way. I then gave my mom a call. "Hey Mom, can I come out tomorrow? I'm just feeling really sick." She then said, "Have your brother drive you out. It's important." Then she hung up again. Well, I couldn't find my brother, so I had to drive myself. My wife was busy. We homeschooled our children back then. When I finally got to my mom's house, it was around 4 or 5 p.m. When I got there, I asked her what was going on. She then asked, Where's your brother at? I couldn't find him. I think he's with his new girlfriend, Wilma, I said. Take a seat. I saw you in a dream. She began to speak. You were helping a man and he was going somewhere. I'm not sure where he was going, but you were helping him, she said. Who was or is he? Did you recognize him? I asked. I'm not sure who it was, but he knew you, and he also knew Leanne. In my dream, he stayed with you for 3 days, and during that time, things were not going right at your house. Be safe these next few days. The Lord shows me these things for a reason. You know that. I know, Mom. I'll be careful, I said. She expected me to stay for dinner, so I stayed. After we ate, family members came and went. My brother David came about 8 p.m., just as I was leaving back home. Hey, did you hear about that wreck between here and town? David said. I've been here since about 4. What happened? I asked. Some guy totaled his truck down by old agency on 89. It happened around 11 this morning, he said. The only thing I saw was the police and ambulance. Even the fire trucks were heading out of town when I was going to the hospital, I told him. After some more small talk, I told Mom that I was going home again. Drive carefully now. Kiss the babies for me as well, she said as I was leaving. I took the long way back home just to be nosy. I thought I would come across the place where the wreck happened. A couple of police cars, a highway patrol, and a tow truck were all that was left at the side of the crash. I continued on driving, and after a few miles, I saw an old friend of mine walking down the side of the road. I stopped and offered him a ride. He put his duffel bag in and jumped in the front seat. After greeting him, I asked him where he was going. He didn't say anything. He just pointed towards the front of my car. The ride back home was rather quiet. When we got back home, well, to our town, I asked him if he wanted me to take him home, and he said, "Can't go home right now. Do you mind if I just camp at your place for a couple of days? I just need to get my head straight. I gotta check with Leanne first, but it'll be fine." I ran it past her. She did say it would be fine since we known him for a long time. We had a few trailer homes on our property, all of which were livable. After showing him one with running water, we settled in for the night. "Hey man, it's Mike. Sorry to wake you up." "What's the matter? It's 4 in the morning, I said. Mike was the mortician. "I need you to do a pickup in Great Falls ASAP. Can you go right now?" It was money that I needed, so I got ready. I went to the funeral home to get the hearse. At the funeral home, the lights turned on when I pulled up. I pulled up to Town Pump to fill up the hearse when I realized just the day before that Mike had talked about the lights. The trip was not what I expected to Great Falls. The hearse broke down. I called Mike, and he took care of everything from his end. I did get it fixed, but I didn't pick up the body until after 9 p.m. I never knew who passed. I just signed papers, loaded up the passenger. They are in a body bag or cardboard box. I could never disrespect the ones who passed on. I'm just there to make the last days on Earth as pleasant and comfortable as possible. As I left Great Falls, the sky was already dark purple. Halfway home, the gurney came loose and rolled up and hit the back of my seat. I stopped and fastened the gurney back in place. This actually happened all the way home. I think my passenger was having fun with me, but I was nervous. Mike said that he was going to meet with me, but that never happened. As I pulled around back, I opened the doors, backed in and began to unload my buddy. After I placed him in the cooler, the phone rang. So-and-so funeral home, Angelo speaking. "Yeah, that's fine. I just need to let Leanne know. I haven't been home since 4 this morning. Do you need to go home and eat, or anything?" Mike was asking. "Nah, I fixed myself up in Great Falls," I said. "Alright, see you in a bit then." The funeral home suddenly became cold and quiet. Even the sounds outside seemed to quiet down. Then the lights flickered. At the same time, I could hear doors slamming, some doorknobs turning. I don't know how long this went on, but I ran to the front door. I was out of there. I opened the door and ran smack into Mike. "What the hell, Angelo? Are you okay?" he said. I was shaking and trying to talk, but nothing came out. I finally calmed down enough to explain what had taken place. We chalked it up to not enough rest and being sick, so he told me to go home. On the way, I couldn't get the day's events out of my mind. I told Leanne everything. We spent about an hour praying, and I was still scared and shaken up. I couldn't sleep all that night. Every little noise would spook the hell out of me. I was really scared. The morning light was a great and welcome sight for me. I tried forgetting about it and went to go check on my old friend. I knocked on the door where we let him crash in. That's when he gave a weak reply. "Come in." Leanne said, "You haven't ate anything." I said, "I'm just not hungry." He said, "You need a ride to your house? I'm actually going back that way. Do you think you can just put me up for a couple of more days?" He said. "Well, we are kind of busy and things are hectic around here," I told him. "I won't be any trouble," he said. "Just a few more days. You have to go home and face the music," I said. I knew I had to be at the funeral home, so off I went. I arrived at work about 8:30 a.m. Mike was asleep on a couch that he had inside his office. How could he sleep in a place like this? I said to myself. He sat up as I walked in. "Good morning," he said, still half asleep. "Anything weird happen after I left?" I asked him. "Not a thing. I have a full day in Cub Bank today. And I was wondering if you can handle things around here. I should be back around 3 or 4 p.m. I have to meet with the family at 4:30. I agreed to hold down the fort, even though inside of me, I really didn't want to. Fear began to build up inside of me as I saw his car drive away. As I was locking the doors, I stayed at the front for a few minutes. Nobody to talk to, and who knows what time people will show up. And that's when I remembered that the funeral home had a kitchen on the southeast side of the building. So I went there to make a pot of coffee to pry my eyes open with. As I filled the pot with water and started prepping my cup, the events of the night before began to come back into my head. Something is definitely going on. I started to remember everything that my mom taught me growing up and what these things possibly meant. Or maybe it's simply because I haven't been getting some good sleep. That's when I heard someone call out, "Hey, is anybody here? Just a minute, I'll be right with you." I grabbed my coffee trying to make it to where this person was at. More than likely someone seeking information about someone who had just passed away. As I started walking back to where the front doors were, it occurred to me that I had locked the doors before I went to make coffee. I got to the front doors, and sure enough, they were locked. What the fuck? As soon as I reacted to that, I heard a high-pitched laugh behind me in the wake room. The big open room where the bodies were put for wakes and viewing. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I felt sick to my stomach. I even started feeling lightheaded and almost passed out. "Come on, Angelo, get a grip, man," I said to myself. Just then, I heard a bunch of tools in the back room crash to the floor. The room that we cleaned and dressed the bodies at. Man, screw that. I didn't go back to find out. I ran out to my car and called my brother on my phone. "David, can you come over and keep me company for a while? Just until I get everything cleaned and ready for this guy's family. I would really appreciate it. I'll be there in a couple of minutes." "What's the matter? You getting scared?" "I just need someone to watch the front while I clean up." I lied to him. "When I tell you I was scared, I really was. I know what you're thinking. Then why are you working there?" You see, it's a different kind of fear than the normal fear that one experiences. I don't know if that makes sense. I even waited outside until he arrived. And even when he got there, I still felt that same feeling. I cleaned up the best that I could. What I had to do next was dust and wipe down the caskets in the display room. I had to open each one and dust it off and wipe it down, so that the family could choose one. Well, I finished and left them all open as if they were already occupied. I turned the lights off and went to have a smoke break with my brother. "Do you ever hear strange things around here?" David asked me with a serious look. "Not really. I just go about my business. Nothing really bothers me here." I lied to him again. "Well, I better get moving. I got things to see and people to do," he said jokingly. "Wait a minute, and I actually have to wait until Mike gets here," I said. "Come on, $5 a game," I told him. "Alright, best out of 3. That's $15 a piece. And, if you don't mind, do you mind getting me a cup of coffee as well?" he said. "I'll be right back." As I walked to the kitchen to get the coffee, I started brewing and walked back and handed him his cup and took my seat. Is Mike here, by the way? I thought I heard someone in that back room, he asked me. No, just us and our guest. He won't be here long. His family's gonna have a home wait, I told him. Huh, I swear I heard someone call you and cough, he said with a serious look on his face. Maybe he came back already. I'll go check it out, I said. As I entered the back room, it was like walking into a freezer. I thought I saw the light in the display room turned on, so I went to go check. When I went into the room, you guessed it, all the caskets were closed. Hell, forget this. I went back to where David was at and I told him that there was nobody there and that he must be hearing things or something. I didn't want to tell David what was going on because he might leave me here alone, which actually didn't help because after we played a few games he said he had to get going, and begging him to stay this time didn't help. Not only that, but the way he left. It's like he was leaving really urgently. I know he must have heard or seen something and he didn't want to tell me. So once again, I was alone, and the fear that I felt was overwhelming. After a bit and not hearing any more noises, I began to feel a little bit better, but to be on the safe side, I went to my car and called Leanne. Hey sweetie, can you bring me some sage and sweet grass? Also my shell to smudge, an eagle feather. Look in the closet, that upper shelf, my cedar should be there too. Why? What's wrong? Are you alright? And where's Mike? She asked all these questions at once. Can you just get them here as soon as you can, please? I said. She was there within a few. As I said, I didn't want to be in this place anymore, so I was just standing in the doorway as she pulled up in the van. When she got out with everything, she then said, Who else is here with you? Nobody. It's just me, I said. She then looked behind me. Who was that guy standing behind you? I guess at this point nothing really surprised me, because I didn't even react to what she said. I simply asked for my sage, and all the other items I told her to bring. Then she said, 10 minutes. I'll give you 10 minutes before I go in there. I started feeling better now that I had this with me. I started praying and smudging the building. She then came in and sat down. That's when I told her everything that happened the day before, and the night before when I brought the body. After I smudged, things did quiet down a lot, but I insisted Leanne stay with me until Mike came back. I began to think maybe I was losing my mind. I had never experienced anything like this before. As we waited, she asked me what happened with David. I thought you said he was going to be here with you. Yeah, I don't know. He said he had stuff to see and people to do, and even to this day, he won't speak of what happened here. Anyways, nothing else happened for the next few hours. Mike came back a bit after 4 p.m. The family was there, so I made them comfortable and served them coffee while we waited for Mike. Damn, Angelo, you still feeling sick? Mike was asking. Yeah, not feeling too well. I took my meds. It should pass in a few days, I told Mike. Have they been here long? He asked. That's their first cup of coffee, I said jokingly. A way to keep track of how long someone's been waiting. Alright, thanks for sticking around, man. I definitely owe you. You should go home and have Leanne take care of you, he said. I shook the hands of the family, offered my condolences, and left. As I was pulling out of the driveway, Mike came out and stopped me. You know what? Just go ahead and take off tomorrow. I need you at 100 for the funeral. I took him up on the offer and went home. The ride home took forever. Even though Leanne left the funeral home before me, I somehow made it home before her. As I pulled into our little trailer park, it used to be on the boarding school road, I could see our oldest daughter, Olivia, outside watching over our younger children, my son Ruben, and our baby Angela. Hey Dad, did you have a good day? She said. The other two were busy playing that they didn't care that I came home. You know how kids are. Spend as much time as you can with your kids because in some time, you'll be begging for their attention. Just a normal day. Where's Mom? I thought she was with you, Olivia said. She was right behind me. The van was running low on gas, so she must have stopped at the C-store, I said to her. I think someone's in the 6th store. The dogs were all going crazy over there. The 6th store was a trailer that we stripped down to just a shell, and we built 5 rooms with 1 bathroom. I told my daughter I had a friend camping out there for a couple of days. I forgot about him, and I decided to check up on him. I knocked on the door. No answer. I called his name while knocking on his door a little bit louder. Still no answer. Maybe he left while we were gone. Just when I was about to open the door, he cracked it open, his eyes half closed from the glare of the sun. "Angelo, what's up?" he said in a quiet voice. "Just thought I would see how you're doing, man. Been kind of worried about you," I said to him. I just gotta get my head straight before I head back home. Do you think that I can stay one more night? I'll be out of here in the morning." Sure. I don't see why not. But hey, Jason, we've known each other for so long," I said to him. "Why don't you come over to the big trailer? Leanne's gonna make some soup and fry bread," I told him. As I was going back to my trailer, Leanne pulled up in the van with some groceries. I helped her with the food and went back in for a quick shower. I then went to my room to change. As I moved about my room, I couldn't help but think about everything that's happened at the funeral home. I wonder if it was the meds I was taking. Maybe because I wasn't sleeping too much, and my imagination running away with me. Anyways, I felt like I was maybe losing my mind. I then went to the bathroom, turned the shower on, and let the hot water relax my muscles. Suddenly, the air became cold. That's when I knew that whatever was at the funeral home had followed me home. This actually made me upset. How could this thing come to my place where my children feel safe? My head was covered in soap, and I couldn't get the soap off fast enough. But from the corner of my eye, I could see a shadow of a person by the bathroom sink. By this time, the soap began to burn my eyes. I closed them tightly and rinsed them off as fast as I could. Fear began to work its way into my already taxed mind, and I was too scared to open my eyes again. With a loud shout, I screamed out, "Get out! You're not welcome here!" And just like that, I felt a peace inside of me. I was able to finish up my shower. I put on fresh clothes and asked Leanne and the kids to smudge and pray with me, but I couldn't find my sage and other stuff. Leanne then asked me if I left them at the funeral home. "I think I did," I said. "Why don't you and the kids get ready and come with me to pick up my things?" I asked her. "Just go yourself. You don't want to take the kids over to that place," she said. "Leanne, I don't want to scare you, but we need those things here tonight," I said in a serious tone. We all piled into the van and drove the 4 or 5 miles back into town. In no time at all, we were sitting in the van in front of the funeral home. "Are you gonna get them? What are we even doing here?" my daughter asked me. It hit me. I was staring at the funeral home for just a few minutes without saying anything. Leanne then said, "Honey, just go and get them and let's get out of here." Something easier said than done. I inhaled deeply and started towards the front doors. I dug into my pocket to find my set of keys to the place. As I stepped into the building, the doors closed behind me with a loud bang. That's when I heard that same sound from the same room as before. I couldn't move. I'm not even sure how long I stood there, but Leanne walked in and asked me if I had gotten it. She said they had been waiting for 10 minutes and she thought something happened. That's when she looked at me. "It's over here. Mike must have left it right here for you." And just like that, we got it and locked the doors and left back home. As we went back home, I started getting ready to smudge our home and all of us. I'm not even sure what's happening or why this thing is following us, but it's time to get rid of it. As I got everybody together, a knock came on the door. "Who is it?" I asked. "It's me, Jason. Can I come in?" "Come in, Jason. What's going on?" I said. "I thought I smelled some sage, and I just wanted to smudge with you and your family," he said. I told him that he was more than welcome, and we all sat down to pray. When we finished, Jason said that he wasn't getting much sleep in that trailer, that he kept hearing noises and just didn't feel safe. That's also why he wanted to come over and smudge, but he said he felt a lot better and was going to go back. I then told Jason to wait for me and that I could walk him back. I then told my kids to get ready to go to bed and that I would be right back. As we walked out, I offered him a smoke. "No thanks, man," he said, looking up at the stars. I lit one up and inhaled deeply. I was tempted to clue him in on what's been going on the last 2 days, but I didn't want to burden him with anything else. Plus, I'm sure he was going through some stuff at home. But before I could open my mouth to say anything, he started saying, "Angelo, man, I haven't been able to come with grips with something that I did. I mean, I've been worried about my family, about Kim." Kim was his little girl, by the way. He then started to pour out his heart to me. He went on about his work, his relationship with Kim's mom, Anna, how he can never satisfy her lust for worldly things. His words, not mine. I lit another smoke from my half pack. The sound of his voice drifted off as I began to relive the day's events and try to make sense of everything going on. Lost in everything that was happening. I'm not sure how long we were out there for, but I couldn't get that strange feeling out of my mind and just how I had been feeling overall. That's when I almost swallowed my cigarette when my daughter Olivia shook my arm. "Dad, Mom's been calling you," she said. I then told Jason I had to head back inside and see what Leanne needed. "Thanks for listening, man. I really needed to just express that," Jason said as he went back into the trailer. "That's what friends are for. Just ask the Creator for help. He has everything in control. Rest up, and we'll see you in the morning." "Good night, Jason," I said. "Yeah, good night, man." "Hey, Dad, I think something's wrong with Jason. He doesn't seem like the Jason that I know," Olivia said. "I know, sweetie. He's been pretty quiet since I picked him up," I said. "How'd you even pick him up?" she asked me. "Grandma wanted to see me. She's having one of her warnings. I think she might be actually right this time." I gave Olivia a kiss on the forehead. "That's from Grandma," I said. She held my hand as we walked back in silence. I walked in and asked Leanne what happened. Leanne then put her finger to her mouth to tell me to be quiet. "Alright, y'all, let's put Barney on. You all can watch Barney for a while before bedtime," Leanne told the kids. "I don't want to watch Barney. Can I just go to my room?" Olivia said. "Alright, but leave your door open and listen for your brother and sister," Leanne said. Leanne then led me to our room. Nice, some action, I thought to myself. I was right, but it wasn't the action I expected. From our room, you could see into the trailer next to ours, the big one. "I don't want to scare the kids, but you need to see this," Leanne said as she turned off the lights and pulled back the curtains. I then looked out the window and into the big trailer. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Just look," she said. She later told me that she was paralyzed and unable to speak as she saw the change on my face, not wanting to look again herself. I too was frozen in fear as I looked into a window of the trailer that was next to ours. I could see the window to a room. I'm not even sure how to describe the scene before me. I want to say shadows, but they were more solid than a shadow. It almost looked like shadows were moving inside of there. That's when 3 loud bangs on the back door flooded me with a new kind of fear. Our room was a partition built on the trailer that we lived in, and the back door was in our room. The dogs were hiding underneath our porch. They were more scared than I was. I could actually hear them crying and whimpering. I looked out the back door. Nothing. Nobody. Just silence. The little ones came screaming into our room, crying, just pointing down the hallway towards the living room. Leanne scooped them up just as Olivia came rushing into our room as well. "Mom, Dad, what's going on in here? Are you guys fighting?" she said. I reached out to close the curtains, but before I could close them, Olivia let out a scream. She was pointing at the window. I jumped up and looked but saw nothing. We then gathered up the kids into the living room. Everybody was crying and screaming at the same time. I knew I had to do something to try and calm down the kids. "Where's the smudge?" I was asking with no answer. I asked my little ones what happened. Reuben, my son, said, "Somebody was at the door trying to take my sister outside." It was then that I noticed our big female dog, Sandy. She was inside with us. Somehow her being with us made me feel safe. "Reuben, what do you mean someone? Was it Jason?" I asked. "No, he doesn't look like Jason," he said, holding his sister close to him and his mom. "Sandy chased him away," Reuben said. "I went back to my room to get a flashlight. and my .357 handgun. Leanne, you and the kids stay in the living room. I locked the back door and pushed the dresser and bed against it. Where you going? She asked. I'm gonna go get Jason and go over to the big trailer, I said. Lock the door behind me. Don't let anybody in, even me. What do you mean, even you? She said. I showed her my key as I walked out the door. As I made my way towards the 6th door, Jason was outside already. He had a big stick in his hands. I heard some noises and then I saw someone looking in your kitchen window. You're not gonna believe this, but when I got close enough to smack him with my stick, he just disappeared, he told me. I told Jason to stand guard by my trailer to keep a lookout for Leanna and the kids. Where are you going? Jason asked. To our big trailer. I thought I saw someone over there, I said. As I got closer, that's when I could hear a bunch of people talking all at once, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. It was like a big crowd of people getting louder and louder. I could still hear them talking when I began to insert the key and turn the doorknob. As soon as I opened it, I expected to see a bunch of people. But when I pushed the door open, it was dark and quiet. All I could hear was the low hum of the fridge. I still went inside. You see, this big trailer was just a big kitchen with tables and chairs. We used it for our children's school as well. I walked in, expecting the worst. When I got about halfway in, the door closed behind me, and a familiar feeling I had felt once too many times the last 2 days came upon me again. I could feel eyes all around me. In the small hallway leading to the bathroom, I felt pure evil, something I had never felt before or since. I was about to go down the hallway. Instead, I turned and looked out the window straight into my bedroom. I was now standing where I had seen the shadows moving earlier. As I looked into our bedroom, I saw somebody. Well, something I'm never gonna forget. I couldn't shout to warn my wife and children. It had holes where you would expect eyes. But when it looked at you, you just knew it could see as well. I broke out in a sweat and felt like throwing up. It had me in some kind of spell. I couldn't move. It smiled at me and turned to go into the living room. I tried to will my feet to move, but my own body wouldn't respond to what my brain was telling it to do. Even my mouth couldn't speak. I tried shouting at Jason, but my whole body shut down and gave in to fear. It was like I was just watching myself. Move, your family's in there with that thing, I said to myself. That's when I felt movement in my hands. Then I saw a bright flash of light, followed by a loud blast. I somehow fired the pistol I had in my hand, missing my right foot by inches. That forced my feet into action, and within seconds, I was at my front porch pounding on the door. Leanna and Olivia were on the inside, leaning with their combined weight against the door, determined not to let anybody inside. Babe, it's me. Move away from the door. With that, she knew it was me. I flung the door open. Ruben was standing behind them, crying. I rushed past Ruben, looking for my baby girl, Angela. That's when Leanne screamed, Angela! She kept repeating as we all ran into the living room. We met Jason coming down the hallway. He was carrying Angela out of the room that she shared with Olivia. Leanne threw her hands around Angela, asking her if she was okay. Angela wouldn't let go of Jason, as Leanne tried to pull her away from him. Come here, baby. Mommy's got you, Leanne said as she tried to take her from Jason again. Meanwhile, Olivia kept her little brother close by her side. We all then went to the living room to try to pull ourselves together. Jason sat on the couch with Olivia and Ruben. Leanne sat in the easy chair holding Angela's hand. I went to close the front door, locked it, and returned inside. Did you guys see it? What do you... I was cut off by the barking of our dogs outside, right at our front door. I noticed Sandy and looking at Jason straight into the eyes. Jason, how did you get in here? No response. Jason, how did you get in here? I said as I slowly cocked the gun in my hand. I thought I saw someone in your back room. The door was locked, so I went to the back door and couldn't get in. When I looked through the window, something was in there moving to the front rooms, so I crawled in through the window, he said. I then saw the baby girl run to that room. I grabbed her, and that's when we met in the hallway. My heart was pounding as he explained. I turned to get my smudge in my room. I found it exactly where I had left it and went back to the others. Before we do anything, is everybody fine? I asked. Are you gonna smudge again? I don't think that's gonna work. I mean, how many times have you tried that stuff? And this thing is still here. We need to pray to God, Leanne said. Whatever this thing is messing with me since I got sick. I'm not sure what to do. I'll try anything, I told Leanne, but lit up the smudge anyway. I was thinking Leanne expected me to pray. Instead, she started praying in a loud voice. When she started to pray, that's when the dogs went crazy outside, barking through their noses. A couple by our back door and a couple in front. The water in the bathroom turned on by itself. Sandy ran in the hallway and started to bark like crazy and snapping like somebody was there. The lights turned on and off as Leanne prayed louder and louder. Looking back, it was almost like one of those scenes from those demonic possession movies out in Hollywood. But this was the real deal. Leanne continued praying, rebuking this evil spirit, commanding it back to hell, back to where it came from. I then pulled Jason aside and told him we needed to do something. How do you or what do you do against a ghost, a spirit, or whatever this thing is? That's when we heard the sounds of something, like somebody was running on top of our trailer. I felt useless. I was supposed to be the protector of my family, the brave one, the strong one, but instead, this thing reduced me to the state of being a kid again, thinking like one. At least it helped in this. I shouted out, call the police. Are you serious? They'll think we're crazy. They're not gonna believe us, Jason said. Suddenly, it became quiet. Leanne and the kids were still praying. Leanne looked up at me. The look in her eyes was telling me, what are we gonna do? We all jumped as the phone began to ring. I picked up the receiver and put it in my ear. It was Mom calling, but I couldn't hear her very well. Mom, I can't even hear you. Mom, we got a bad connection. Hello? Hey, I tried to say to her. Then, a bunch of static. The phone crackled a little bit. Then it went dead. Don't tell me. The phone died. Call her back, Leanne said. I then hanged up the phone, picked it up, and put it in my ear again. Except this time, there wasn't even a dial tone. What's going on? Did she answer? I shook my head no, not even a dial tone. I said, but I gave it another try. Still no dial tone. That's right, the car, I thought. I can use the phone there, I told her. I dug in my pocket for my keys and started out the door. You guys better come with me, I said. Jason went out first with Angela, Ruben, Olivia, and Leanne all followed Jason. Even our 4 other dogs formed like an escort around us with Sandy bringing up the rear. We felt safe with the dogs at our side. One safe inside the car. I told Leanne that we should go spend the night in Browning. She agreed. What about a change of clothes? Olivia, who was very quiet up to that point, spoke up. I don't want to go back in there, Mom. I'm not going in there. In the big trailer was our washer and dryer as well. I have some of our clothes clean and folded in that laundry basket on top of the dryer, Leanne said. The child in me cried. I really didn't want to go back in there. I handed Leanne my pistol, and I told her I would be right back. She turned to Jason. Jason, can you please go with Angelo? Please? He didn't say anything. He just opened the car door and got out. Just grab the whole basket. You don't need to grab anything else, she called out as we walked to the big trailer. Man, when I came in here, it felt strange. And this is from where I saw it. Whatever the fuck this thing is, we need to hurry and get it, I told him. When we got to the door, Jason stopped me from going inside. You wait here, man. I'll get the basket, Jason said. I hit the light switch, and the big kitchen lit up. I could still feel the evil inside. He walked into the laundry room and came out with the clothes without incident. I turned off the lights and we went back to the car. That's when Jason stopped and looked at me with a strange look. What's going on, Jason? I said. Angelo, I'm not going with you, man, he said. Jason, I can't leave you here alone, not after what just happened. What if it comes back? I told him. Listen, you have to level with me. What's going on, man? Once again, he said, You just won't understand. I just locked myself in my room until morning. After going back and forth for a while, seeming like he was set on his choice to stay. And the only reason I agreed was because I saw Sandy licking his hand. You should let Sandy sleep in your room. She's a good watchdog. And he said thank you. On the way to Browning, Leanne was upset at me for leaving Jason behind. He didn't want to come in, honey. I tried to tell him to come with us, but he wouldn't. I was trying to explain. She then picked up the phone and said, You need to call your mom. We should also get a room and put the kids to bed. Then I'll give her a call, wondering if I should go back for him. Leanne, what do you think? Should we go back for Jason? I expected her to say yes, but before she could answer, all the kids started to cry out. Please, don't go back there. Let's just stay here. We checked into a hotel. After paying for our room and getting the kids in bed, Leanne picked up the phone and called my mom. She then began to tell her everything that's been going on since my trip to Great Falls, up to our current situation. As she spoke with her, I paced the floor thinking about Jason. There was something that kept telling me to go back, and to insist on him either going home. His family must be worried about him. It wasn't the first time he spent a day or two over here with us, except this time, it just felt different. I started putting my jacket back on. Leanne told my mom to hold on for a minute and said to me, Where are you going? I need to go back out there and make Jason go home, or at least come with us or something. I don't feel right just leaving him there, I told her. As I walked out, I could hear her telling my mom that I was going back for Jason. And so I did. As I drove past the funeral home, I swear I saw a silhouette of a person in one of the windows. Screw you. I then started down the boarding school road. I could see our place. It looked like all the lights were on in all the trailers. Some of them were blinking, except for the one that Jason was in. There was no light. I wasn't about to go back into any of the trailers to see what was going on when I got there. Just as I pulled in, all the lights went out. That's when my phone began to ring. It was Leanne. Fuck, I shouted to myself, my heart pounding again. Where are you? She said. I just got here. I'm gonna pull around to the 6th door and honk. I don't want to get out of the car, I told her. Listen, your mom said she's been trying to reach us for a couple of days, except that every time that she calls, someone ends up laughing and hangs up the phone, or they just whisper stuff real fast. She also said that she's been having nightmares. She hears the same whispering, like 2 or 3 people whispering at once, to where you can't even understand what's being said. As she was telling me what Mom said, I was honking the horn to get Jason's attention. What else did she say? Did she say why she was calling in the first place? I asked. Yeah, she wanted to know who the person was that you picked up, the body. She wants to talk to you. And get this. She also said, don't let Jason leave your place. I can't leave him out here alone. What if something happens to him? Whatever this thing is, it's out to get someone. Leanne, this stuff doesn't happen for no reason, I said. Plus, he's not even coming out. I need to see if he's okay, I told her. Before I got out of the car, I noticed the dogs weren't around. I rolled the window down and called to them. Sandy, come here, girl. 3 times I called. Whenever I would call her, she would just come running. I left the lights of the car pointing towards Jason's door. Jason, it's me, I shouted again as I walked to the 6th door. The headlights of the car cast my shadow in front of me as I approached the door. I heard dogs barking, dogs in the distance, but I couldn't tell if they were our dogs. When I got to the door, that icy cold feeling came over me again, except this time, something was different. An awful smell filled the air, the smell of human waste and burning matches. The hair on the back of my neck and arms stood on end. I felt nauseous. Jason, I yelled again. Jason, are you in there? I said. I tried the door. It was locked. I then reached for the key. Then I realized that they were on the keychain in the car. I stepped off the small porch and half ran back to the car to get the key to open the door. When I got to the car, the phone started ringing again. Is he coming in? Remember what your mom said. Don't let him leave. Leanne told me just as I looked up at the door. What I saw next was a shadow on the trailer, as if someone was standing between the car and the front of Jason's door. I dropped the phone and put the car in reverse. I was on the road in no time flat. I stopped on the road and shouted back towards the trailers for Jason, honking the horn as well. Every time that I shouted Jason's name, someone would shout it back. It seemed like an echo of my voice. I heard Leanne speaking, so I picked up the phone. She wanted to know what was going on. I told her what happened, and she said to just come back. At this point, I felt terrible for leaving Jason there. And where the hell are my dogs at? When I got back to the hotel, Leanne didn't want to know what happened. She needed to know. And after explaining to her, she said, why don't we just try to get some rest and try to figure all this out in the morning? She talked me into it, since I hadn't slept well. I ended up knocking out when I hit the pillow. Most of the day was gone when I woke up. Leanne said she paid for another night at the hotel. The little ones seemed to be their playful selves. Olivia was still asleep. I quickly got dressed and told Leanne I couldn't believe she didn't wake me up. She then said, I've been calling back home. I thought Jason might answer. Maybe he left back home when I got there. It's daytime, and the veil is not so thin out here during the day. So I decided that I was going to confront Jason to see what's going on. Because apparently, according to my mom, there's also something going on with him. So the first thing I did was go back home and see if Jason was fine. It must have taken me about 10 minutes to get there. I found him in the room, sitting, staring out the window. Jason, are you good? I gave him a little shake. He then finally said, yeah, just a little stiff. You got some calls from Mike, he said. Leanne's been trying to reach you all day, dude. She said you weren't answering the phone, I said. I was over in the big trailer in the morning. I didn't answer the phone. I just heard the messages that he sent, he replied. Jason, do you want to go home now? I asked him. He just shook his head no and laid down. I never told him what Mom said, and I didn't even ask him again. I was going to tell him, or asking him what's going on, but I figured that he might just tell me. Eventually, I went to my trailer to get some stuff for Leanne and the kids. I went inside and turned on the answering machine. 3 messages from Mike. He asked if I could return his call, that he was extra busy. The second one, he was begging me to call him back ASAP. And last, that the family of the motor vehicle accident guy decided to move the funeral to that afternoon, and that he was way behind, so I called him back. All of a sudden, it got icy cold, so I took my ass out of there as fast as I could. As I left, I just put the phone down. I didn't even hang it up. I just wanted to get out of there. I went to see if Jason wanted to go home or just take a ride with me. Then I remember what Mom told Leanne. Not sure what to do. I ended up asking Jason anyway. Nah, it's kind of peaceful out here. Think I'll stick around for a while, he said. Peaceful? Were you even here last night? If that's peaceful to you, Jason, I hate to be around you when you think things aren't being peaceful. I walked back to the car and pulled away. On the way back, I picked up the phone and tried Mike again. So and so funeral home, this is Mike speaking. Can I help you? Hey Mike, it's me, Angelo. What's going on? I asked him. Hey Angelo, everything's crazy over here, man. Can you come over? I know you're supposed to have the day off. I really need you. The funeral for the guy in the MVA was scheduled for tomorrow, but the family moved it up for today. I can be there in about an hour, I said. Alright, it would be great if you can be here sooner though. Just try to get here as soon as you can. Sounding disappointed, I hung up and gave Leanne a phone call. Hey sweetie, Mike needs me to go in today, but I want to go see Anna. Alright, I sent the kids out to go see your mom. I had David and Wilma pick them up, she said. Alright, I'll be there in a few. I then hung up. When I pulled into the parking lot of the hotel, Leanne was in the small lobby waiting. We got some coffee on the way to Anna and Jason's house. Does she know we're coming over? Leanne asked. I didn't think about calling her. I just thought she should know Jason was at our place. I'm sure she's kind of worried about him, despite whatever they got going on. I also thought that maybe we could just go over to see if she knows what's bugging her husband. Their car wasn't in the driveway, so we kept on driving. This town isn't very big. If you carefully plan your way, you can see the whole town in one drive-through. We spent about 15 minutes looking for Anna without any luck. Leanne suggested that we drive to Jason's mom and dad's place. Jim, who is Jason's dad, was outside working on his truck. We both got out of the car and went up to Jim. "Well, howdy, what brings you guys here? Are y'all looking for my son as well?" "We're actually looking for Anna. Just wanted to talk to her." "Well, you just missed her. She dropped Kim off 10 minutes ago. Said she was gonna go look for Jason." I was about to tell Jim that Jason was at our place when Leanne turned and started walking to the car. "You know what? I think I know where she is," I said to Jim. "Well, if you see my son, tell him to come back home." Jim said, "Will do, sir. Thanks for everything." We got in the car and pulled out of their driveway. "Where are we going now?" I said. All Leanne said was to drive out to Last Star Homes. So that's where I went. The funeral home was on the way, so I told Leanne that I wanted to stop and check in on Mike. When we got there, Leanne said that she would wait in the car. I walked into the office and called out Mike's name. "Angelo, is that you?" "Yeah, it's me," I said as I followed his voice to the kitchen. He was having a cup of coffee and a donut. "Did you already come to get started? I actually wasn't expecting you for a while," he said. "I just wanted to make sure you're going to be fine for a bit. Leanne and I are looking for a friend right now. It's kind of important," I said just as Leanne walked in. "I found her. She's at Jim's place. He told her we were looking for her. She said if we came back or called, she would wait for us back home." "Sorry, Mike. How you been?" Leanne said. "But I can pull through as long as you give me my help back," knowing Leanne was about to drag me out. "I'll be back as soon as I can," I said as we rushed out. We ran back to the car and hurried back to Anna's house. "How did you know where she was back at Jim's?" I asked. Leanne picked up the phone and waved it to me. She then said, "What are you going to tell Anna?" "Well, I'll just let her know that Jason's at our place and see what's going on. He won't tell me. Anna might know." The rest of the way to their house was silence. Their car was in the driveway, still running. We knocked on the door. "The door's open," Anna shouted over the radio. "Hey, you guys, I was just over at Jason's dad picking up Kim. Jim said you guys were looking for me. What's up?" I spoke up and asked Anna if things were alright with Jason and herself. "We had an argument the other day. He stormed out. I haven't seen him since then." "Did he come over and cry on your shoulder? I know both of y'all are close," she joked. "No, he didn't, but he did say that he was worried about you and Kim, and that he was also worried about his family. I just thought that you might know what's going on," I asked her. "We were fighting about money, as always. I got really mad at him, then he up and left. I haven't talked to him," she continued. "Why? When did he tell you that?" she asked. "He told me a few days ago. I was trying to think of an excuse to leave when Leanne spoke and changed the subject. The other reason was to see if you were going to bring Kim out to Olivia's birthday party. Just let me know. I'll be there," she said. "I better get this guy to work, or we might start fighting over money as well," Leanne said. They both started laughing. I told Leanne to drop me off at the funeral home. I then gave Leanne a kiss before she drove away. "Be careful out there now. Try not to be alone," she said. I walked in. Mike was loading things we needed at the funeral site. "Hey Mike, I'm back. What do you need me to do?" I asked Mike. "Just help me load everything in the Suburban. You drive the pallbearers. I'll drive the hearse." We left the funeral home. I knew the routine. I went to the gravesite. Mike went to the home and would drive the body to the church. Meanwhile, I would set everything up at the gravesite. I finished up and met Mike at the house and waited for the man. Everything seemed to go along good so far. No eerie feelings, no chills, no cold air, no evil sounds. Mike then waved me into the house to help carry out the flowers and flower stands. When I entered, I felt that cold feeling again. I looked around at the friends and family to see if they noticed anything wrong. Nobody seemed to notice. The pallbearers were forming a human chain and passed different types of flower arrangements. After the last person said their goodbye and went outside, Mike and I started to close the casket. I was sweating by then, shaky, and a little queasy. Some of the ladies were crying, a mournful cry. It was a sad moment for them. I could feel their pain. Mike then put the casket key in the casket and locked the covers in place. I thought I heard a knock coming from inside of the casket. I looked at Mike, expecting him to be in the shock that I was in, but he just continued to go about his work. "Mike, did you hear something?" I asked. He shook his head no. "Let's focus on getting done here. Be professional," he said without looking at me. He knew I was somewhat scared, ever since the other night. Everyone was in their vehicles or getting inside, while the pallbearers loaded up the casket. I got behind the wheel of the Suburban as the pallbearers went in. Surprisingly, they were in a good mood, cracking jokes and overall cheerful. Then one of them spoke up and started to talk about the night before at the wake. "Did you guys hear what happened?" he said. "Man, I was there." "What went on?" said somebody else. "Just a few of us were up last night. Some guy walked in. Nobody knew him, but he knew us by name, and he kept asking for somebody named Jason, and if we knew where he was." "Jason?" somebody else said. "Jason who?" "The only Jason I know is that guy married to Anna," he said to the others. We got to the church before I could hear any more. I waited outside the church, smoked a few cigarettes. "This shit is unreal," I was thinking to myself. Just then, Leanne pulled up. In a small town like this, everybody knows where everybody is at. "Your mom's on the phone. She wants to talk to you," Leanne said. I went down the steps of the church to talk on the phone. "Hey Mom, how are my cats doing? Are they good?" I asked her. "Don't worry about them. They're good. But listen up. Your friend Jason, he's in big trouble. You need to talk some sense into him before he leaves your place." "He didn't leave yet, did he?" she asked. "No, at least I don't think so. But what kind of trouble?" I asked her. "It's not from this world. It's from that other place I told you about when you were a kid. When you're done, go to him. I'll be praying for you, my son. Be strong. Don't waver. Don't give in to fear. I know you don't believe the way that I do, but we worship the same God. You just call him Creator. I call him Jesus. I love you. Now be strong." With that, she hung up. "What did she say?" Leanne asked. "Most likely the same thing she told you," I said. "She didn't tell me anything. She just said to bring the phone to you." I then told her what Mom said. The service was over, and people began to come out of the church. The funeral was long even though the ride was short. I started to feel uneasy again and didn't know why. Then, that's when I saw him, just standing there, looking at me. He didn't even blink. I tried to walk around and get a better look at him, but every time that I moved, he was always on the other side of the crowd. I was thankful that the graveside service wasn't very long. After people started leaving, we began to load up all the equipment back into the Suburban. I followed Mike back into the funeral home, and then I unloaded everything. As I was putting stuff away, Mike was talking to me, but my mind was somewhere else. "Angelo, are you listening?" Mike asked me. "Man, I'm sorry. I was thinking about something else," I said. "I guess so. What's eating at you?" I told him that I would let him know once I figure everything out. "Man, why are you so busy anyway? What's been going on? It didn't seem like you needed me in the first place." He then pointed to the cooler and said, "We have another guest. Can you stay and give me a hand?" "Mike, I can't, man. I need to get home. A friend of mine is in trouble," I said, feeling a bit guilty. "But come first thing in the morning," Mike said. We said our goodnights and I went to the office to call Leanne. She picked me up. We went to the room and talked about what to do. I decided to go home and talk to Jason, and Leanne was going to wait with the children. I did a lot of searching myself as I drove home. Once I got there, I unlocked the big trailer. I could hear echoes of the night before. I spotted the location and the floor as I stood in the spot, just like the night before. When I looked into my room, trying to picture that thing in my mind, then it hit me. That thing that was in my room, it was the one at the gravesite today. That's when I ran to the 6th door. Jason was exactly the same as I left him, laying on his bed. "Jason, we need to talk, man." He didn't argue with me. Let's go over to the big trailer. We went over and sat down at one of the tables. Jason, man, you need to spill the beans. What happened? I'm not gonna take no for an answer, I said. He just sat there, not saying anything. All he talked about was his family, about Kim and Anna, how he loves his family, how they always been there for him. Jason, dude, I need to know exactly what you did. He looked at me. I never hurt anyone, if that's what you're worried about, he said. Well, do you want to be with your family? Do you want everything to work out for you? Your family is worried about you. Anna and Kim are looking for you. Do you love them? I always have, he said. Let's go home. No matter what's broken, you can fix it, I said to him. Home, he mumbled. I'll take you right now, Jason, I said. Someone's looking for you all over town. I think he was here last night. I'm not even sure what stopped him, and I don't know if we can stop him if he comes back, I told him. Mind you, at this point I'm practically begging him when he finally said, Alright, let's go. We got into the car. I was actually surprised. As we got into town, I told him I was going to make one stop. We pulled into the funeral home. I was about to go in and talk to Mike when Jason said, Hey, Angelo, I know you're a busy man, so I really appreciate everything, hanging out with me and listening. He then walked up to me. He hugged me, and then he said, Thanks for everything. I'm good now. I think I'm gonna walk home from here. That way you don't gotta drive me. Are you sure, man? I said. He looked at me and said, Yeah, I'm good now. Thanks for everything again. I then told him to take care and be good. I then went inside. Hey, I thought you went home. You know the guy that we put in the ground today? Well, he crashed trying to avoid hitting the guy we have in our back room. He didn't swerve in time though. Still ended up hitting him. They found him in some ditch last night. The highway patrol went to investigate the crash, and that's when they found him. We walked to the back room, and there he was, laying on the table. It was Jason.